Beneath the weary white lights of Seattle International Airport, Gate G lingered in a hush that was not quite silence, but something quieter, like the breath held between arrivals and departures. The air carried a sterile chill, touched by recycled conditioning and the faint metallic tang of aluminum and jet fuel. It was a place suspended in limbo, built to wait, for someone to land, for someone to leave, for someone to return to no one. The echo of flight announcements rose and faded like distant waves, their monotone cadence washing over the glass walls and vacant rows of plastic seats. Occasionally, the low thrum of suitcase wheels rattled across the glossy stone floors, breaking the monotony like brief punctuation marks in a sentence too long to finish. Overhead, the fluorescents flickered once, tired bulbs and tired ceilings, before settling back into their cold glow. The people here moved slowly, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. Jet-lagged figures with slumped shoulders wandered through the terminal, trailing exhaustion behind them like invisible luggage. Some stared blankly at the departure boards, others at their reflections in the long windows overlooking the tarmac, where planes dozed like sleeping giants under a foggy sky. The night shift was a different world. Conversations were hushed, the air grew heavier, and time seemed to lose interest in keeping pace. Procedures became muscle memory. Smiles, if any, were mechanical. It was the hour when even the airport itself looked weary, when hope paused, and everything felt muted. But for Jude Rayner, tonight carried a different weight. He stood with stillness that didn't quite belong to the place, like a figure carved out of something older than weariness. His uniform fit with practiced precision, every crease a story, every patch earned. He wasn't scanning the crowd like the others. He was watching. At Jude's side stood Valor, a towering German shepherd whose silhouette spoke of both strength and solemnity. His fur was a deep sable, a blend of midnight black and burnished copper that rippled like smoke with every shift of muscle. It wasn't the polished coat of a show dog, but the worn armor of a soldier, weathered by dust, rain, and the harsh breath of places no one spoke about. There were scars beneath that fur, small, faint. But they were there, like punctuation marks on a story only he and Jude knew by heart. Valor stood with the stillness of stone, yet his every movement was deliberate, fluid, like a current of silent warning. His frame was broad-chested and powerful, built for endurance and protection, but never clumsy. His paws landed on the floor without a sound, each step placed with the care of a creature that had learned the cost of noise. His tail rested low, calm but alert, mirroring the measured discipline etched into every line of his posture. His eyes were the color of worn amber, intense, steady, unflinching. They didn't simply look at the world. They evaluated it, scanned it, interrogated it. There was no wandering gaze, no idle curiosity, only focus, deep and unnerving, as if he could see more than light allowed, as if he wasn't just watching movement, but motive. His ears were sharp triangles, always erect, twitching minutely at sounds no human could register. A breath caught in a throat 2 terminals away, the click of a safety release, the subtle shift in a voice trying to mask fear. He absorbed it all, not with tension, but with readiness, like a wire strung tight, waiting for the faintest vibration to speak the truth. Valor wasn't merely a service dog. He was memory, forged into muscle and bone. He was instinct, refined through hardship and loyalty, where Jude's own senses faltered, dulled by fatigue, blurred by doubt. Valor stood in the gap. He didn't just guide Jude forward, he grounded him, reminded him of what was real, what was near, what was coming. He was not an extension of Jude. He was the part of Jude that still believed in something worth protecting. And in that quiet, sterile terminal under the watch of tired lights and hollow echoes, the two of them stood like a single unit. Man and dog, shaped by trust, moved by silence, bound by something older than commands. The final shift of the day always invited complacency. Understandably so. Most inspections were winding down, and the remaining arrivals were scattered, mostly international travelers stumbling under the weight of time zones. Jude used to think he could read this terminal like a map. He knew the rhythm of the place, could sense the heaviness of a refugee's suitcase, or spot the hunchback of an aging tourist. But tonight, as he and Valor walked their last loop through the checkpoint zone, the dog stopped. Suddenly, without signal. Jude froze. He didn't speak, didn't ask, didn't command. He simply leaned slightly and looked down. Valor stood completely still, like a stone rooted to the cold floor. Ears high, head slightly lifted, eyes unblinking. He had sensed something. Jude followed Valor's gaze. Far down the concourse, a wave of passengers had just emerged from a flight arriving from Seoul. Their faces were drained, movements sluggish, shoulders heavy from hours of confinement. They drew no special attention until one woman stepped forward, pushing a navy blue stroller. She wore a gray hoodie, the hood half pulled over her head. Her eyes remained cast down, avoiding contact with anyone. Her hands gripped the stroller's handle so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. Inside the stroller, the child was bundled in a blanket, head tilted, eyes closed. Asleep, perhaps. But it wasn't the child that caught Jude's eye. It was the single bead of sweat rolling down the mother's forehead. In an air-conditioned space kept cool and stable, sweat meant something. But that wasn't what made Jude pause. It was how she walked, not fast, not slow, but calculated, as if she were trying to keep her steps even, yet couldn't hide the tension layered into every movement. Valor still didn't move. His body seemed coiled to the woman's heartbeat. Something wasn't right. Jude leaned in and whispered, "What is it, kid?" Valor didn't respond. He didn't need to. His body was speaking clearly, neck pointed, legs frozen, eyes fixed, as if the entire world had narrowed to a single, inescapable orbit. The stroller rolled past, not far from where they stood. Jude caught a glimpse of the name tag. Claire Song. The name rang a bell. He couldn't say why, but it felt familiar. Everything remained within control, but the comfort of routine had disappeared. Jude stepped half a pace forward, his hand resting lightly on Valor's shoulder, a signal to be ready. In the next few seconds, the world seemed to hold its breath. The lights glared, the hallway quieted, the woman kept walking, the stroller glided forward. But Valor no longer waited. The dog launched forward so decisively that Jude barely kept up. Valor lunged, planted his front paws on the stroller's edge, and barked. The first bark rang through the terminal like a thunderclap, breaking silence. It wasn't just a warning. It was the roar of instinct, of training, and of loyalty. The mother screamed. The stroller rocked. The blanket draped over the child slipped to the floor, and then came the glint of metal beneath the lights. A Glock 19, taped to the stroller frame, hidden under the cushion beneath the child's back. Barrel aimed upward, safety off, round chambered. For a single heartbeat, everything held still. Then the chaos exploded. Passengers screamed, guards pulled weapons, people fell, luggage toppled, sirens blared like alarms of something far more dangerous than a gun. Jude stepped between Valor and the crowd. And while every eye turned toward the woman, he looked only at the dog. There was no fear in Valor's eyes, no rage, only one thing remained: certainty. Valor knew from the very beginning, and this time, like so many others, he had been right. Valor hadn't waited for a signal. He never did, but this moment felt different. His leap carried no aggression, no hostility, only pure instinct and conviction. He moved as if some invisible wire had pulled every muscle in his body toward the truth. The stroller trembled as Valor's front paws landed on its edge. A deep, piercing bark shattered the stillness that had cloaked the airport terminal. Loud, sharp, halting the world in a breath. People jolted. Screams rang out. Luggage clattered to the ground. A few passengers stumbled backward. Security guards tightened their grips on holsters, eyes darting in every direction. The woman, Claire, screamed out of reflex, yanking the stroller back. But it was too late. Valor didn't move. He didn't bite, didn't harm the child. He just stood there, barking in steady bursts, as if trying to force the world to look, right there, at the stroller. A strip of fabric slid off little Theo's body in the confusion. And then, everything froze. Beneath the blanket, beneath the child, taped along the side frame of the stroller, was a small, dark object, metal glinting under the light. The barrel pointed straight up. A Glock 19. No one in the room moved for the first few seconds. Only the sharp cry of baby Theo broke the spell, a first wail rising in a symphony of chaos and disbelief. Jude rushed forward and dropped to his knees beside the stroller. He pulled the blanket aside, eyes fixed on the duct tape and the unmistakable shape of the weapon. It wasn't a toy, it wasn't a replica, it was real, and it was loaded. "This is a live weapon!" someone shouted behind him. A security officer with a gun drawn, shouting orders. "Back off!" Jude barked. "Nobody fires! There's a child here!" Valor stood his ground, unmoving, like a stone pillar, his eyes locked on Claire, the mother now clutching her head, backing away step by shaky step, her body trembling as if trying not to collapse. Guards poured in like floodwater. Alarms flashed. A man in uniform screamed into a radio. Others unrolled tape to block off the crowd. People ran. Others filmed. Someone sobbed uncontrollably. An older passenger sank into a chair, hand on chest, gasping for air. And Claire, she still stood, arms out as if shielding the child from the world. But Jude's eyes never left Valor. The dog had stopped barking. Silent now, but still alert. His gaze stayed fixed on the woman, not the child, not the gun, on her. No growl, no threat, just a stillness. And a look Jude had come to understand. There was more here. Something deeper. Claire stood like a ghost in the storm. The alarms kept screaming. Footsteps thundered from all directions. Commands echoed. But around her, everything felt muffled, distorted, like she were underwater. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks pale. Dark circles under her eyes blurred the shape of her pupils. Claire didn't shout, didn't resist, didn't explain. Her arms hovered mid-air, trembling in place like a figure trapped between panic and paralysis. And when her eyes met Valor's, there was no defense in them anymore. Only hope, or maybe a plea, that someone, even a dog, would see past the label of a threat and recognize the person. An officer approached, handcuffs ready, but Jude raised a hand. "Wait." "For what?" The officer frowned. "You saw it, didn't you? A gun on a baby. That's criminal, no debate." Jude didn't turn around. His gaze stayed on Claire. "I'm not saying we ignore it, just don't rush." "You want your dog to investigate for us now?" At that moment, Valor took a single step forward. No pounce, no retreat, just sat in front of Claire, still as stone. Then something no one expected happened. He touched her hand with his muzzle. A gesture so light it felt like wind. But it was enough. The emotional wall Claire had held finally collapsed. She broke down. No sobs, no screams, just tears. Falling, steady and quiet, as if they'd been held back for months, maybe years, with no escape. Her shoulders trembled, her whole body swayed, as if the slightest breeze could bring her to her knees. Jude needed no more evidence. He had seen criminals cry before, but not like this. Not with the kind of pain only a mother who had held her child through fear could carry. He gently reached for her hand. Not to restrain, just to let her know no one meant her harm. "We're going to a private room," he said softly but firmly. "You can tell your story there, if you're ready." Claire didn't say anything. She nodded. It was the quietest nod Jude had ever seen. In a small interrogation room, far from the checkpoint, Claire sat across from Jude. The room was cold, stark white, and bare. Nothing but a metal table, 2 chairs, and a single camera mounted in the corner. She curled into her worn hoodie, hands clenched tightly in her lap as if holding on to something invisible. Outside, Valor sat at the door. No one had ordered him. He just stayed there, as if he knew he was meant to wait. Jude watched Claire for a long while. He didn't turn on the recorder, didn't open a file. He just sat there, like someone who had learned that silence was sometimes the most effective question. Finally, Claire lifted her head. Her voice came out hoarse. "You're the only one who didn't look at me like I'm a monster." Jude didn't respond. "You don't know me. But your dog," he looked at me like I was still human. The silence returned. Then she spoke. Slowly, haltingly, but clearly. Her name was Claire Song. She was from Daegu, South Korea. She had studied in the US, stayed, and worked as a translator for a tech company. She had once been in love, had a family, believed marriage was the safest place to be, but that love turned into fear. Night after night. Her husband, Grant Donovan, had gone from a charming man with accolades and connections to a nightmare with credentials. "He controlled everything, my messages, my bank account, my body," Claire said, her eyes avoiding Jude's. "And then came Theo. He said the child was his, that I was just the shell." She had tried to leave once. The police said there wasn't enough evidence. She tried again, planned to return to Korea, but her visa was too short. She couldn't stay there long enough. Staying in the US meant risking arrest if her husband accused her of kidnapping. "Do you know what that feels like? To be a mother, but have no right to keep your child?" Jude said nothing. He understood, not in the literal sense, but he knew. That feeling of choosing between what was legal and what was necessary to survive. "The gun," Claire went on. "I never meant to use it. But I knew, if he found me, I wouldn't get a second chance, and I couldn't let him take my child away." Jude gave a small nod. Barely noticeable, without judgment. He stood up, walked to the door, and opened it just a crack. Valor looked up. No words were needed. The dog rose, stepped into the room, and quietly settled beside Claire's chair. Not a sound, no bark, no growl, just presence. And it was enough to make Claire's shoulders loosen for the first time in weeks, maybe months. Outside, the airport had returned to normal. Passengers boarded flights. Gate G was swept and cleared. The stroller was taken for inspection. But inside a small room, where a mother still leaned into the quiet company of a dog, something had shifted. Valor, the dog who never barked without reason, had gone silent. Because this time, he knew he didn't need to alert the world. He just needed to listen. The one thing no one else had done. The interrogation room was small and sealed tight, the kind of space where even a breath sounded measured. The pale gray walls weren't just painted. They felt dusted over with the wear of time, dulling the room into a kind of numb, cold void. Fluorescent lights from above cast an unnatural white glow, as if someone had tried to scrub the space of all traces of humanity, leaving only a sterile stage for unflinching truth. The metal table was bolted to the floor, not for aesthetics, but as a symbol. Nothing in this room could be moved without permission. 2 chairs faced each other. No armrests, no back support, nothing to lean on, not even hope. In one corner, a small surveillance camera sat, barely visible, but its gaze was constant, tracking every breath, every blink, a silent, emotionless witness. The cold wasn't from the temperature. It came from the nature of the place. A room where words were weighed like weapons, where silence carried the weight of a courtroom. The woman on the other side of the table, Claire, was the only thing in the room that still held any trace of color. Her shadow stretched across the gray tile like a smear of ink not yet dry, faint but still trying to exist. She didn't move. Her body leaned slightly back in the chair, searching for some fragile anchor amid the storm rising quietly inside her chest. The chair gave a soft creak as she shifted. Too quiet to startle, but loud enough to break the dense silence pressing against the 4 walls. There were no cuffs on her wrists, no guards behind her. But the stillness in her body, the kind that stretched so long it made you forget she was even alive, wasn't calm. It was the stillness of something drained, of someone with no strength left to fight, and no reason to. Jude sat across from her. He didn't rush to open the file, didn't touch the notepad. He looked at Claire, not with the eyes of a detective waiting for a confession, but with the gaze of someone who had seen more pain than necessary in others. There was patience in his expression, but caution too. Valor, like a shadow of loyalty, lay at Jude's feet. No growl, no shift. Only the steady rise and fall of his breathing gave proof that the creature was still there, alive, aware, and waiting. Claire hadn't spoken a word since she was brought in. No, what's going to happen to me? No pleading, no blame. She simply sat, frail, hands resting limply in her lap, fingernails pressing lightly into the fabric of her hoodie, like she was clinging to whatever warmth still lingered in her own skin. Jude didn't need words to see something breaking inside her. Not fast, not loud, but the kind of collapse that happens silently, like a rotting roof during rain. One look at her, and it was clear. This wasn't her first time in a room like this. Not the first time questioned, doubted, inspected, and forced to be silent. "Your name is Claire Song, right?" Jude spoke for the first time, his voice soft. Claire didn't answer, but she nodded, just enough to show she was listening, that she understood, and that she was choosing not to resist. "Would you like some water?" Another slight shake of the head. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Valor. Not with fear, not like before, but with a blankness, no plea, no defense. Just the look of someone who had grown used to being misunderstood. Valor shifted, moving from a curled position to lying flat, his head pointed straight at Claire. Ears alert, eyes open, watching every small movement, not to strike, but as if waiting for some invisible signal from her. Jude noticed it. He had seen Valor react to suspects before, to smugglers, liars, criminals. But this was different. No growl, no tension, just a kind of quiet focus, as if the dog was breathing in time with the woman across from him. No one spoke. No one needed to. The silence said everything. That sometimes what breaks a person isn't the shouting, but the moments when no one listens at all. And that was why Jude remained seated. And why Valor hadn't closed his eyes. Claire slowly moved her hand inside the oversized pocket of her hoodie, each motion hesitant, like searching for something long buried at the bottom of despair. For a moment, Jude thought she wouldn't bring out anything. But then, from her trembling palm, something small appeared. A tiny stuffed bear, barely the size of her hand. Its fabric was worn to mesh. One plastic eye had fallen off. An ear was splitting at the seams, and across its stomach a crude stitch of white thread marked a repair done by hand. It looked like something worthless, forgotten in the luggage of children passing through airports around the world. But Claire didn't toss it on the table. She placed it gently on the cold steel surface, carefully, like it was the only remaining link between her and the reason she was still there. No one said a word. Even Valor didn't react. He only tilted his head slightly, watching her with eyes that somehow seemed to understand. Whatever came next mattered more than any defense ever could. Claire gently turned the little bear in her hands, feeling for the coarse thread across its belly. Slowly, steadily, she began to pick the stitches apart. Patient, unrushed. When the fabric finally parted, there wasn't stuffing inside. There was something small and black. She pulled out a micro SD card, barely larger than a fingernail, and placed it gently next to the bear. The motion, though no one had taught her, carried the weight of a final surrender. As if she no longer had the strength to explain, only the courage to let someone else see it for her. Jude picked up the card. His laptop sat open beside him. No password, no questions. He simply inserted it and opened the first visible folder. A series of video and image files appeared, all labeled by date codes, arranged in a way that felt strangely meticulous, like she'd been preparing for this for a long time. He selected a video. Seconds later, the screen lit up. A kitchen. Dim yellow light. A child's sobbing could be heard faintly in the background. The camera had been hidden, placed at a low angle, grainy. Claire, yes, her, stood hunched by the sink. A man approached, his voice low, bitter. No sound of hitting, but it wasn't needed. The threat in his tone was enough. If you leave this house without permission again, I swear you'll disappear without a trace. Claire didn't answer, but her body recoiled instinctively. Another clip. A hospital. Injury report with typed words. Right wrist trauma. Suspected hairline fracture. Extensive bruising on my lower abdomen. The X-ray needed no comment. Then came an audio file. Claire's voice, soft, broken, responding to someone at a legal aid center. I don't want to press charges. I just want to keep custody. Then another video. Harsher. An argument. Loud crashes. Blurry images, but clear enough to show Claire being shoved against a wall, a child's scream echoing. It ended with Claire sitting on the floor, arms over her head, blood trickling from her lip, while the man walked away calmly, as if finishing a tiring household chore. Jude stopped the video. He couldn't watch more. The room, already cold, thickened with the weight of proof no one could ignore. No need for police, no need for experts. Anyone watching those clips would understand. This wasn't a woman trying to hide a crime. This was someone exhausted from surviving every single day. Claire didn't look at the screen. She sat still, as if the video no longer concerned her. Because it was too familiar, too painful, too real. And when you've lived in hell long enough, sometimes you stop noticing the fire? Jude closed the laptop. His hand tightened slightly. Neither he nor Valor said a word. They didn't have to. In the bright silence, the truth had spoken for itself, and its voice came from a tattered toy bear, carrying the pain of a mother who had run out of places to turn. Claire sat motionless long after the final video ended. She didn't look to Jude, didn't wait for a reaction, didn't hope for comforting words. Maybe she had grown used to being dismissed, questioned, or twisted into something she wasn't. But now, when the room had heard everything without needing words, she knew it was her turn to speak. "I didn't plan to hurt anyone." Her voice was barely more than a breath, just loud enough to exist in the enclosed space. "I never meant to cause harm, especially not in a place like this." Jude didn't interrupt. He stayed still, his eyes on Claire, never pressing. He knew you couldn't demand truth from a mother who had hidden her pain inside a teddy bear, just to protect her child's chance at peace. "I brought the gun," she continued, her voice still low but steadier. "Not for self-defense the way you think. I don't know how to shoot. I've never fired a gun. But I knew he could find me. And if he did, I just needed something to make him hesitate. 1 second. 1 second might be enough for me to grab my son and run." "You don't understand." She looked up for the first time, meeting Jude's eyes. "You don't know what it's like to wake in the middle of the night, not because your baby is crying, but because you dreamed he was standing next to your bed, his hand on your child's ankle. You don't know what it's like to teach your child to call his father by a fake name, just in case we run into someone who might recognize us." Jude remained silent. At his feet, Valor slowly lifted himself. Claire's hands tightened slightly on her lap. "I can't prove I'm a victim. No one believes a Korean woman with broken English, living on temporary status, whose former employer went bankrupt. To the law, I have no roots. And without roots, you have no ground to stand on. He has lawyers, friends in the system, medical records saying I'm unstable, written by the doctor he chose. I once went to the police. They asked, 'Do you have bruises?' I didn't. Because he was smart. He never left marks. It was always word against word, and mine? No one listened." Valor stepped closer. Nothing sudden, just slow, steady movement. He circled behind Jude and walked directly to Claire's side, stopping next to her chair. Claire bowed her head, almost in apology, as if she didn't deserve to be touched by anything living. But Valor didn't wait. He lifted his head gently and placed his muzzle on her knee, not pressing, not demanding, just being there. Claire froze. She didn't sob, didn't collapse like in the movies. She simply trembled, a raw, instinctive response of a wounded creature feeling kindness without judgment. Her hand moved slowly, then rested lightly on Valor's head. For the first time in many days, she touched something not out of defense, but connection. Valor remained still. He didn't nudge, didn't ask for affection. He simply let her know. He was here. She wasn't alone. And Jude knew. No report could describe what was happening before him. A mother, nearly swallowed by the world, being helped by a canine dog to recover the last fragile piece of trust buried deep within her soul. Claire once believed that love was something natural, like breathing. She believed in first glances, in genuine concern, in small, tender gestures. And when she met Grant Donovan, everything she had ever believed in seemed perfectly aligned to welcome that man into her life. Grant entered her world at a company party, surrounded by men in gray suits and women in office dresses. But he stood out not for his looks, but for something deeper, an aura that made others instinctively trust him. The way he shook hands, how he held eye contact when listening, and that smile, polite, measured, just warm enough to let down the walls Claire had spent years building. He worked in private security, protecting those who need to be protected, as he put it. At the time, Claire was just a part-time Korean interpreter working at an American tech firm. She didn't think much of it. To her, Grant was the embodiment of stability, a real name in the blurry world of people like her who lived on visas and uncertainty. Their first conversations were simple. questions about work, a kind word when she coughed, a coffee after work. Then came the promise. I always feel safe when I'm with you. For a woman far from home, alone in a city with no family, those words were enough to make her hand over her heart without asking for credentials. But soon, those sweet words became shackles. Not in any obvious way, more like a bracelet that tightened slowly with time, so subtly that Claire couldn't tell when it had started holding her back. The first time was when Grant told her, "You shouldn't go out with male colleagues. I just don't want anyone to get the wrong idea." She listened, thinking it was care. Next, he said, "You don't need to carry money. I'll take care of everything." Claire felt relieved, until she realized she no longer knew the password to her own bank account. He didn't forbid things. He simply suggested that her old friends couldn't be trusted, that her mother in Korea shouldn't call too often, because you need to focus on building a family here. And when she asked to return to work after maternity leave, Grant said, "No need. I earn enough. It's better if you stay home with the baby." Claire tried to push back. At first, she thought all relationships needed compromise, but each time she resisted, Grant didn't shout. He smiled. A faint, composed smile, then quietly disappeared into his office. No smashing things, no threats. But that night, the internet was disconnected. When she asked, he said, "It's just a network issue. You can wait." Then it was the phone. Suddenly, no signal when she called her mother. Her credit card was declined at the pharmacy. Her identification documents were put away for safekeeping. And she began to understand. Grant didn't need to raise his voice to threaten. He only needed to make her completely dependent. Their apartment slowly turned into a velvet-lined prison. Beautiful, clean, well-equipped, but with no exit. Small cameras appeared in room corners, on bookshelves, even in the smoke detector. When Claire asked, he said, "Just to protect the baby." But on some nights, when she cried quietly in the bedroom, Grant would walk in, without knocking, without hesitation, as if he had already heard it all. Claire once thought she was imagining things, that her fear was irrational. Until one day she left her phone in the kitchen and came back to find Grant scrolling through her messages, openly, without hiding. He wasn't ashamed. "I was just checking to see if anyone was bothering you." She went silent for weeks after that. Because she knew. He didn't need to prove anything. He could call the police and fabricate a story about her having postpartum mental issues. He could take the baby and claim she was unfit to be a mother. And because he had connections, reputation, money, he knew no one would side with an Asian woman on a short-term visa holding a newborn in her arms. That was when Claire started setting alarms for 2 a.m. Not for any reason, just to check if the doors were locked, if the camera lights were blinking red. She began journaling, in Korean, and hid the notebook inside the sofa lining. One day, the notebook vanished. Grant said, "You should sleep more and stop dreaming of things that aren't real." When Claire took Theo to see the pediatrician, Grant insisted on going along. He signed the prescription and paid the bill before she could even reach for her wallet. She once tried to speak privately to the doctor, but Grant waited just outside the door. Sometimes the doctor looked at her, his eyes full of pity, but no one asked. No one said a word. She tried to escape once, just once. She stepped out of the apartment with Theo in her arms, and the phone rang. It was Grant calling from his office 10 miles away. "If you pass airport security, every image will be sent to immigration. And you know what happens to people caught crossing borders with a child and no legal documentation." That time she went back, no one knew, except Valor, still just a name in a training file, who had heard similar stories from another place, from someone else. But this time, it was Valor's eyes that saw Claire, not as a case number in a report, but as a person, suffocating under the grip of a man who never needed fists to bring his victim to her knees. Grant Donovan, the man in a sharp suit, a well-knotted tie, smiling eyes, and honeyed words. But inside, he carried a world cold and dark, where he built a prison without bars, locking a woman inside not with violence, but with trust and isolation. Claire had lived in it, and when the frayed teddy bear concealed a small memory card in its belly, that was when she knew. Either she escaped or she died, not by knife, but by nights of suffocating breath, mornings waking to footsteps just behind her. The decision to leave didn't come in a burst. It was like the slow accumulation of suffocation, until the body instinctively surged to grasp the final breath of oxygen. Claire waited for one of Grant's business trips. He traveled often: contracts, conferences, security lectures. A man living two lives. By day, a consultant invited on television. By night, a psychological tormentor in his own home. When he slammed the door shut, Claire didn't pack luggage. She only held Theo, took a small purse, in which she had hidden her Korean passport and the cash she'd saved over 6 months. Not much, just enough for a plane ticket and a journey of uncertain shape. She went to Seoul, where her mother lived. No prior notice, no explanation. The old woman, upon seeing her daughter holding a child, wept silently. But Claire had no time for a long embrace. She knew Grant would find out. He would use technology, connections, and his familiarity with her behavior to track her down. During 3 weeks in Korea, Claire lived like a shadow. She didn't leave the house during the day. All contact with friends was severed. She deleted social media apps, changed SIM cards, even used a fake name when scheduling an appointment with the consulate. She knew international child custody laws didn't allow one parent to unilaterally take a child out of the country, even if that parent was the mother. And if Grant filed an extradition request, she would have no way to resist. She thought of Canada, where an old friend worked for an organization protecting immigrant women. This friend had once said they could help her apply for humanitarian asylum, but it would require time and absolute caution. Claire knew what that meant. Just one detection, a flight itinerary exposed, a face recognized by airport cameras, and everything would end. And that happened sooner than she expected. At Incheon Airport, on the day she planned to fly to Vancouver, Claire saw a man in a white shirt standing near the passport check counter. He did nothing, didn't approach, didn't touch anyone. But his gaze was the kind of gaze she would never forget, the kind that had observed her every step for months in the California apartment. She changed direction immediately, without revealing panic. She told the staff that Theo had a fever and requested to reschedule the flight. Then she walked straight out of the terminal, hailed a taxi heading in the opposite direction of the city. She didn't sleep that night, nor did she speak to her mother, aside from repeatedly apologizing. In her mind were hundreds of plans, all leading to one conclusion. She had to disappear in a way Grant couldn't predict. Had to go to a place he wouldn't expect. Not Vancouver, not Toronto, not anywhere she'd ever mentioned. She bought another plane ticket under a fake name, destination Seattle, just a temporary stop. The goal was to transfer to a smaller city, where she could quietly apply for protection, raise Theo in the shadows, and live like an invisible person until the law could find her voice. Claire knew Seattle was one of the most security-intensive airports. But that was also the perfect misdirection. Grant wouldn't think she was bold enough to pass through there with a child and mismatched documents. Precisely because he thought she was too weak, he wouldn't expect her to go that far. And on the night she carried Theo through customs, her heart pounding so hard she couldn't hear the boarding announcements, she brought nothing but a cloth bag, the teddy bear hiding the memory card, and a Glock 19 pistol carefully taped under the stroller cushion. No spare magazine, no training. But it was the final symbol of will. If discovered, at least she wouldn't have her child taken without a chance to resist. That Glock wasn't something Claire had to search far for. It was in the second bedroom, where Grant kept a large steel-locked cabinet, inside which were various weapons, from tactical knives, pepper spray, to registered and untraceable handguns. He called it his personal collection, a display of control and sovereignty of a man in his own home. To him, guns weren't just for defense. They were declarations, a way to assert that anyone could be shot if he felt threatened, including Claire. Grant had never held the child for more than 5 minutes. He didn't change diapers, didn't wake up at night when Theo cried, didn't care about the type of formula or vaccination schedule. But he knew exactly where each gun in the house was, how many bullets were loaded, the maximum range. To him, control through the barrel was much easier than through trust. And Claire, throughout her time in that apartment, learned only one thing. When you live with someone who carries the arrogance of power and the fear of losing face, every gun in the house is a reminder that you don't get a second chance to make a mistake. The night Grant went on a business trip, Claire opened the cabinet using the code she'd memorized from a secret glance. She didn't choose the biggest gun, nor the most beautiful. She chose the Glock 19 because it was compact, easy to conceal, and simple enough to use without extensive training. She cleaned it thoroughly, wrapped it in soft cloth, then taped it under the stroller frame, a spot no one would check unless they knew beforehand. "Only there he won't look," she whispered as she applied the final layer of tape. Because Grant would never look there. To him, the stroller was women's territory, a place for the child, a possession he claimed as ownership, but never touched tasks like wiping noses, changing diapers, or lulling to sleep. That very disdain was the final gap Claire could exploit to secure a safe space. Carrying a gun wasn't the right choice, but it was the only choice. In the eyes of the law, she could be charged. In society's view, she might be judged as reckless, dangerous, irresponsible with her child. But no one saw the months she lived in a house without her own key. No one heard the midnight voice messages. No one felt the anticipation of footsteps from someone who once swore, "I'll take the child even if you die." She once tried to believe in the system, once walked into a police station speaking in broken English, eyes heavy with exhaustion, holding a sick child in her arms, and asked for a protection order. But they only asked, "Do you have a medical report confirming abuse? Any photos of injuries? Any witnesses?" When the world doesn't believe you're a victim, you have to become your own protector. No recognition needed. No understanding required. Just one truth remained. Your child must survive. Claire didn't carry the gun to kill Grant. She carried it because if he found her at the airport, if he tore Theo from her arms like he had once threatened, at least she would have a chance, not to shoot, but to buy time. 1 second, 2 seconds, maybe enough for someone to intervene, a passenger, a staff member, a canine dog that just happened to be there at the right moment. She couldn't rely on the law, couldn't wait for a protection order, couldn't wager her child's life on the sympathy of a system that had once overlooked her cries for help. So she carried the Glock 19. Not to win, but if she had to lose, she wanted to lose standing, not bowed, not ripped away from her child like an object. And when the white lights of Seattle Airport cast down, when the voice over the PA echoed through the night, when the Malinois named Valor let out a sharp bark and lunged toward the stroller, she knew her journey had not been in vain. Because for the first time in months, there was a living being who recognized that she wasn't carrying a weapon to hurt anyone. She carried it to survive, and to protect the only thing she had left. A little boy named Theo, still asleep beneath layers of blankets in a stroller that held a gun no one ever thought to look for. Except her, a mother. And this time, no one was going to take that away from her again. The training camp sat on the edge of the Arizona desert, where the heat seared skin and the air was thick with a blend of sweat, red dust, and the tang of rusted metal. The dogs that came here were not brought to be loved. They came to be tested, selected, or dismissed. Not all of them met the standard to become working dogs, and even fewer ever had their names listed on the final roster. Some were too aggressive, some were too timid, shrinking back at the sound of a whistle. But then there were those who didn't fit into any category. Silent, guarded, unreadable, and because of that, they were labeled unfit. Valor was one of them. "The dog nobody wants," the trainer muttered through his teeth, gesturing toward the last kennel in the row, where sunlight never quite reached. "Not aggressive, not scared, just indifferent. He doesn't respond to commands, doesn't seek affection, doesn't need anyone. It's like he made up his mind to stop believing in anything." Jude stepped forward, stopping 2 paces from the bars. In the dim shade, Valor's eyes flickered like dying embers. He didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't even glance at the newcomer. He just lay there with his head resting on his front paws, still as if he already knew no one wanted him. And he didn't need to be wanted. At that time, Jude had just transferred from the military to customs enforcement. He wasn't used to working in an environment where gunfire wasn't part of the day. But there was something in Valor's eyes he recognized. It was the same look he had seen in the mirror every morning when he still wore his uniform. The look of someone who had come home, but hadn't really returned. He didn't speak, didn't call the dog's name, didn't try to approach. He simply sat on the cement floor, far enough not to be invasive, close enough that if Valor chose to move, he could. In his hand was an old tennis ball, frayed and stained with dirt. He didn't toss it hard, just let it roll softly into the center of the kennel. The ball made a single turn and stopped a hand's width from Valor's snout. Valor glanced at it, didn't move, didn't react. But he didn't turn away either. The next day, Jude returned. The ball was still there. On the 3rd day, it had bite marks. He smiled. For the first time when Jude sat down, Valor stepped out of the shadows. Not fast, not showy, no tail wag. He simply walked toward the light, 1 step at a time, and sat down in front of Jude. Calmly, as if they had known each other before, in a trench or on some sunburnt road in another lifetime. The trainer watched the moment, shrugged, shook his head, and walked away. "Maybe it's a neurological match. You can try, but don't expect too much." But Jude wasn't hoping. He didn't need a perfect dog. He needed one that knew how to be quiet, how to observe, how to survive, just like he did. Training began with the basics: sound response, hand signals, scent tracking. Valor didn't learn quickly like the others. He didn't wait eagerly for commands or get excited over treats. But he remembered. For a long time. And once he understood, he never made the same mistake twice. In the 4th week of training, while others focused on top candidates, Jude quietly led Valor to a stretch of empty ground behind the barracks. No drills, no orders. He simply threw the tennis ball, the same old one, and waited. Valor watched the ball, then looked at Jude. 1 second, 2, then he ran, for the first time. Not for a reward, not for a command, but because he wanted to. He retrieved the ball, returned it, and sat. "Good boy," Jude whispered. No clapping, no loud praise. He just sat and placed his hand gently on Valor's head. The dog closed his eyes for a moment, as if it had been a long time since a touch meant anything but control or obligation. Their bond wasn't built through official evaluations, but in unnamed moments like that, beneath pale afternoon sun, with desert wind brushing past dry cactus, and in the rhythm of two souls breathing in silence. After leaving the training camp, Jude and Valor were assigned to Seattle International Airport, one of the busiest transit hubs in the Pacific Northwest. Their job was to patrol security, scan baggage, sniff out drugs, explosives, and prohibited items, the things machines might miss and humans often overlook. But Valor didn't operate like other canines. He wasn't a tool. He wasn't just a biological sensor covered in fur and claws. One winter morning during a 6 a.m. shift, Jude and Valor followed their usual patrol route. At the time, Concourse D was undergoing routine technical inspection. A team of maintenance workers passed through the security zone, carrying tools and equipment bags. No one looked suspicious. They wore name tags, uniforms, everything in accordance with protocol. But as they passed, Valor halted. He didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't spring like he would with a confirmed trace. He just froze, as if a strange current of air had brushed past his face. His head tilted slightly, ears perked. His body stiffened into a stance Jude hadn't seen since that first day at the training camp, when Valor had curled up in the far corner of a steel cage. Jude noticed it instantly. "Something's off," he muttered. There was no need to ask. Valor never reacted like that to regular travelers. Food odors or electronics didn't faze him. But one of the maintenance workers, a wiry man with a hurried gait, was giving off something Valor could not ignore. Jude flagged him down and requested to inspect the backpack, citing a routine internal security check. The man initially complied, but as he opened the bag, his eyes began to dart. A small movement, but for Valor, it was enough. He moved half a step forward, nose reaching towards the bottom of the pack. "There's nothing in there," the man said, voice tight. Jude didn't reply. He calmly unzipped the lower pocket beneath the lining and found a small plastic pouch hidden inside a tool case. Inside were multiple substances, opioids, amphetamines, and high-dose prescription painkillers outside the allowed transport list. He wasn't a major criminal, just a courier smuggling contraband under an underground order, but he didn't expect to be exposed by a dog. Not because of the scent, everything had been sealed in aluminum and odor-proof wrapping, but because he broke a sweat walking past Valor. Jude remembered the look in Valor's eyes that day. Not aggressive, not restless, just a gaze that seemed to peel away someone's outer skin and see the body tensed beneath, vibrating with fear. When they returned, Jude sat on a stone bench behind the control room, waiting to fill out his report. Valor lay beside him, resting his head on Jude's leg. "You didn't smell him," Jude whispered. "You sensed his breathing change, the fear he couldn't hide." Some things couldn't be detected by scent, but could still be felt. Cortisol, adrenaline, hormones that surge when the body is under extreme stress, a slight increase in heart rate, a rise in sweat without exertion, pupils dilating even though the lighting stayed the same. Valor didn't sniff out fear. He sensed it, with something no one could ever teach. Jude had once seen Valor stop beside a small boy wandering the terminal with a backpack, looking for his mother. There was nothing suspicious about the child, but his mother was crying in the waiting room, overwhelmed after losing their luggage. Valor had walked up to the boy, brushed against his leg, and looked up, as if to say, "It's okay, someone is here now." No one trained him to do that. There were no rewards for that kind of behavior in any operational manual. Jude had never imagined himself saying this about a dog, but to him, Valor wasn't just a partner. He was the unspoken version of himself, a being that had once survived being abandoned, one that had learned to observe in silence, one that understood the world wasn't always kind, so he had to become someone who could stand tall when kindness was nowhere to be found. "He reads souls," Jude once told a superior during the year-end meeting. "Not with his eyes, with something else I don't know how to name. But when Valor looks at someone, I know I need to stop, look longer, and he's never been wrong." During a special baggage check, a female passenger was flagged due to inconsistent personal details. All her papers were in order. Her luggage showed nothing unusual. The scanner detected nothing. But Valor wouldn't leave. He lay quietly beside her suitcase, still and unmoving. Jude checked again, more thoroughly, and found a double lining hiding forged documents, a second passport, and a map outlining a human trafficking route. The woman didn't panic when confronted. But Valor had already sensed something in her eyes. Not fear of being arrested. Fear of being sent back to the place she had once escaped. Later, it was revealed she had been a victim of trafficking, forced into labor across several countries before finally fleeing. That day, Jude didn't file a standard report. He requested the case be transferred to the Refugee Support Unit instead of criminal prosecution. When asked why he trusted her, Jude replied, "Because Valor did." And that's enough. Some things could only be recognized by those who had once carried deep wounds themselves, and somehow Valor carried that past in every step he took. For Jude, working with Valor wasn't a technical procedure. It was learning how to listen to the world through an unnamed sense. Once, when another officer laughed and joked, "You think your dog's psychic or something?" Jude simply said, "No. I think he's been hurt so deeply that now he sees wounds in others before they even know they're bleeding." That was why Jude wasn't surprised when Claire's entire case, from the gun hidden under the stroller to the shaky footage recorded in her old kitchen, started gaining momentum. It had begun as an internal report forwarded to the special unit. But within 12 hours, an emergency meeting was called with the involvement of a federal prosecutor. She was assigned to cases dealing with cross-border domestic violence. Her name was Elaine Vargas, a woman in her 40s, short hair, soft-spoken but firm. She didn't assert authority. She didn't need to. One glance at the video Claire had submitted, and she knew this wasn't an ordinary domestic dispute. This wasn't one-sided conflict or vague accusations. It was a systematic structure of control, complete with threats, manipulated records, and clear signs of someone using their social position to silence a victim. She called it legalized abuse, something that often happened when the perpetrator also held the power to rewrite the narrative. Vargas ordered a full retrieval of Claire's medical history from the past 3 years. She requested verification of Grant Donovan's firearms licenses. She asked the South Korean consulate to confirm Claire's stay abroad. And most importantly, she demanded every byte of data from the memory card Claire had hidden inside the teddy bear be secured and analyzed. Jude observed the entire process from the outside, as if the slow, skeptical justice system he had long questioned was finally beginning to move with intention. No longer just cold reports, no longer signatures forgotten in a drawer. This time, each step left footprints on a path leading to a truth Claire had once believed no one would bother to find. And then, as often happens in cases like this, one woman spoke up, and others began to listen. Less than a week after the initial findings were submitted, an anonymous email arrived at Vargas's office. It contained a low-quality voice recording, a woman's voice, recounting how Grant had forced her to quit her job, monitored her through hidden cameras, and once threatened that she would lose her child if she ever took him to court. They traced the sender. She was a former colleague of Claire's, once lived in the same apartment complex. Then came a second woman, an employee from the security firm where Grant held shares. A third was an old college flame who had broken up with him because Grant always made me feel like I was being watched even after we ended things. Pieces started falling away from the mask. Every testimony left a crack in the polished shell Grant Donovan had built over the years. No one had ever sued him successfully. No one had taken him to court. But now, when a mother dared to cross borders holding her child with a gun hidden beneath the stroller mattress, the story could no longer stay buried beneath the rug. The investigation was widened. Subpoenas were issued. Grant did not appear. His office was closed with a note that read, "System maintenance." Yet, as word began leaking to the press, his network started to unravel. The story of a mother hiding a gun in a stroller to protect her child from a powerful father became a side headline in a local paper, then spread quickly across social media. At the time, Claire was still staying in a temporary private room, under the watch of a civilian security officer and a night nurse. She rarely went outside. Even when she carried Theo to the window to show him the sky, her eyes stayed wary, as if the slightest sound might mean Grant would appear from behind the curtain and snatch her son away before anyone could stop it. Jude visited twice. The first time he didn't enter. He simply stood at a distance and handed over a bag of milk and simple toys. The second time, he brought Valor. Claire didn't speak much. She simply sat down, resting her hand gently on Valor's head as he walked over and placed his muzzle on her leg, just like he had the first time. A familiar gesture. But this time, something changed. Claire cried. Not from fear, but from relief. A few days later, Vargas made the official decision. Claire and Theo would be transferred to a victim support center in San Cugat del Vallès, a discreet, protected space with a full team of therapists and legal counselors to help rebuild their case from the beginning. They were no longer being investigated. They were the key witnesses, and those who needed protection. Before leaving the temporary room, Claire packed everything into a small fabric bag. She didn't own much, just a few changes of clothes, a journal her mother once wrote in, and the old teddy bear. The memory card had already been backed up, but she kept the bear as a reminder that sometimes survival isn't about evidence. It's about remembering the days you made it through. She held Theo and stepped into the vehicle. Valor stood beside Jude, watching her with a calm gaze. For the first time in a long while, Claire boarded a vehicle without looking back. And even though there was still a long road ahead, at least now she knew, she wouldn't be walking it alone. Justice isn't always a perfect scale, but sometimes it starts to shift when someone dares to speak. And this time, the voice came from a mother who carried a gun not to attack, but to protect, and a dog who couldn't speak, but who was the first to understand that the fear was real. The house in San Cugat del Vallès wasn't large. It was built simply, painted white with brown trim, tucked behind a row of old olive trees, with a slanted tiled roof and bougainvillea vines hanging over the balcony. From the outside, it looked like any other home in this quiet Catalonian suburb. Ordinary, almost anonymous. And for people who had just escaped the extraordinary, that ordinariness was the most precious thing of all. Claire stepped through the low wooden gate, Theo asleep in her arms, his head nestled against her shoulder, his tiny fingers clutching her shirt as if holding on to life itself. A social worker opened the door with a smile and asked no questions. She led them into a ground-floor room, already set up with a small crib, a few soft fabric toys, and 2 clean sets of sheets. It wasn't a hotel, and it wasn't a hospital, but it was warm. A place to begin again. That night, for the first time in many months, Claire slept through. No nightmares, no waking up to check the lock 3 times, no holding her breath every time footsteps echoed in the hallway. She slept on her side, hand still wrapped around Theo's palm, as if by instinct, and didn't let go. But she didn't have to stay tense anymore. Her body was finally allowed to believe that no one could find her here. When sunlight slipped through the thin curtain, Claire opened her eyes. It took her a few seconds to recognize where she was. Not because it felt unfamiliar, but because there was no hum of surveillance cameras, No blinking red light in the corner. Just sunlight. Real light. From a morning that wasn't rigged to trap her. In the kitchen, the smell of weak coffee and toasted bread drifted from the counter. A woman with curly hair placed a cup of milk on the table and smiled as Claire stepped in. "New here?" she asked in English with a Spanish accent. Claire nodded. "I'm Lucia. Room next door." Lucia didn't ask what had happened. She only pointed to a faint scar on her own wrist and said, "We all carry something." Then she returned to feeding her little girl, who was sitting in a high chair with big dark eyes, curiously watching Claire. Claire sat at the table like someone learning to sit in life again, not to survive, but to exist. Around her were other women. Each carried a different expression, some quiet, some still puffy-eyed from crying through the night, some newly arrived with trembling hands pouring water. But they all had one thing in common. They didn't owe anyone an explanation. No one asked, "What did he do?" No one said, "You have to be strong." Because they had all been strong for so long they had run out of words. Children played in the backyard, chasing soft balls and plastic cars. A brown-haired girl walked up to Theo and held out a knitted giraffe. Theo looked at his mother, then gently took it. Claire nodded. Inside, she exhaled for the first time since the plane had landed in America. The day passed without anything extraordinary, but to Claire, every hour was proof that she still had a chance to live as a human being. She was taken for a medical checkup, met with a therapist for the first time. Someone who didn't ask why, only asked, "Did you sleep last night?" "For the first time in months," Claire said. "I slept without hearing someone open the door." That evening, after the lights were off and Theo was sound asleep in his crib, Claire sat alone on the porch. The air was cool, but not cold. Crickets chirped in the background, and a warm yellow glow shone from a house in the distance. She opened the journal her mother once kept. The old pages faded at the corners, and for the first time added a new line. "This is the first time I don't feel watched." There was no clearer way to speak of resurrection, not with grand declarations, just a quiet realization, thin as morning mist. But for someone who had lived in the shadows, it was a light that needed no explanation. The next morning, as Claire was folding the blankets, a soft knock came at the door. She picked up Theo and stepped out. On the porch, under the gentle Mediterranean sunlight, a tall man was standing, and beside him, a familiar figure that made her heart pause. Valor. The dog stood upright, ears alert, eyes calm as he looked at her. No bark, no sudden movement, just his steady presence, like in that interrogation room months ago. Claire opened the door. Theo blinked. In a moment of recognition, the boy turned and murmured with a soft excitement, "Wow." Valor stepped forward. No lunging, no jumping. He simply moved ahead, lifting his head, allowing Theo, still in his mother's arms, to reach out and touch the soft fur between his eyes. Claire looked at her son, then at Jude, the man standing quietly behind, still holding the bag he had brought. "How are you both doing?" he asked, voice low and steady. She nodded. "Better than I thought I could be." They didn't speak about court hearings, or the investigation reports, or what was coming at the federal trial. In this sun-dappled courtyard, there were no accusations, no victims, just a woman who once fled, a man who once endured, and a dog who once saw pain where others looked away. Jude reached into his bag and pulled out a small gift, a brand-new tennis ball, still holding the scent of fresh rubber. He placed it on the porch. Valor looked at it, then at Jude, as if confirming permission. Then he picked it up gently, turned toward Theo, and dropped it beside the boy's feet. A simple act, as if to say, "I missed you." Claire laughed. For the first time, it wasn't a stifled laugh. Not restrained, not rushed. She set Theo down on the ground, letting him crawl toward the ball. Valor stepped back half a pace, patient. And when Theo touched the ball and gave it a soft push, the dog nudged it back with his nose, as gently as if playing with a fragile bird. "He really remembers him," Claire said, eyes fixed on the two in front of her. "So do we," Jude replied. "And you?" She stayed quiet, then nodded slowly, a nod that came from a place deep inside, a place she wasn't sure she still had access to. They spent the entire morning in the yard. Claire told Jude about her first nights there, about how Theo slept soundly now without startling, about the other women she was beginning to know by name, by story, and by the shared knowledge that she was no longer alone. Jude didn't interrupt. He just listened, sometimes smiling, sometimes glancing at Valor as if reading something in the dog's rarely changing expressions. "He still lies in front of the door every night," Jude said. "No orders. No command, but every night, at the same time." "He's still standing guard," Claire whispered, "even now that I'm safe." Jude said nothing. He simply looked at her, the woman who no longer feared the light. And Valor, as if he understood every word, stepped closer to Claire, sat down beside her feet, tilting his head slightly, eyes quiet and clear. No touch was needed. No expression. But it was obvious. This was where he belonged. And this was someone he had chosen never to turn away from. A few weeks after that visit, Claire walked into the courtroom wearing a simple pale gray dress, holding Theo by the hand. The 3-year-old could now say, "Mama," clearly, and waved to everyone with the wide-eyed curiosity of a child who didn't yet understand that this brightly lit room was where his mother's life would be decided once again. At the judge's bench sat an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She read through the charges and case files with an even tone. Among them, the federal prosecutor's petition stated plainly, Claire Song was not the defendant. She was a survivor of a long pattern of coercive control, manipulation, and psychological abuse orchestrated by Grant Donovan. Grant was present in the courtroom. He wore a dark suit and walked with the familiar air of someone used to being heard and believed. But this time, he did not stand in the center of the room as a figure of authority. He sat behind the wooden barrier, between 2 attorneys and 3 security officers. His hands no longer held a phone or microphone or Bluetooth headset like before. They clutched his knees, trembling as a list of testimonies from 12 other women was read aloud. Claire didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Everything she needed to say had already been written, in hospital records, shaky video footage, her mother's testimony, and the journal pages once hidden under the sofa cushion. But most of all, in Theo's eyes, a boy who no longer cried every night, no longer flinched when a man approached, and now sat peacefully coloring in a book on his mother's lap. The judge placed her hand on the bench. Her voice was steady. Considering the evidence, the testimonies, and the full course of this case, the court hereby revokes all custody and guardianship rights of Mr. Grant Donovan. He will be criminally charged with psychological abuse, threats to life, unlawful restriction of personal freedom, and obstruction of justice. No one spoke in the room. Claire only held Theo's hand a little tighter. The boy looked up, smiled at his mother, and to her that smile was the clearest verdict of all. But justice that day did not end with the verdict. Prosecutor Vargas, the woman who had once held the initial case file with skeptical eyes, now stood, walked over to Claire, and handed her a thin document, an official clearance of all charges, signed and sealed by the court. "No one has the right to call you a criminal," Vargas said softly. just loud enough for the two of them to hear. Because you didn't commit a crime. You survived. Claire didn't reply. She only bowed her head. Not out of fear this time, but gratitude. The hearing was over. Reporters stepped back. Grant was taken away. Claire and Theo returned to San Cugat that afternoon, beneath the quiet golden light stretching down the narrow streets. That evening, after Theo had fallen asleep, Claire sat at the small wooden table by the window. She pulled out a blank sheet of paper, a blue ink pen, and began to write. Dear Jude, Rayner, and Valor, I'm not sure if writing a letter is the right way to say this. But as you once said, some things don't need to be said out loud. They just need to be written at the right moment. Thank you for believing me when no one else did. Thank you for standing still when the world was shouting. And thank you for letting a dog who wouldn't follow commands be heard. Long before I could find my own voice again, I used to think I had to stay silent to protect my child. But you both taught me that silence doesn't always save anyone, and that sometimes a bark at the right time can save an entire life. I don't know what the future holds, but today, I've started to sleep without waking in fear, and Theo can smile without needing to look over his shoulder. If one day you pass through San Cugat, please come visit. I bake a decent loaf of bread, and I have my mother's old soup recipe. Valor can rest anywhere in the yard, and Theo now knows how to throw the ball back. I won't say I'm back to being normal, but I am learning how to live, and this time, I am no longer someone who runs. With respect, Claire Song. She folded the letter, placed it into an envelope, and handed it to the staff at the shelter to mail the next morning. Jude read it a week later, after returning to headquarters. He didn't say a word. But as he held the letter, Valor approached and gently nudged his muzzle against Jude's hand, as if he too had heard the words, carried on some distant breeze, through the scent of ink on paper, or perhaps through something simpler, the sense that everything had finally found its rightful place. And maybe the one thing justice can never put into writing is trust. The kind of trust that says, sometimes, someone who hasn't been believed by anyone just needs a single look from a creature that never speaks to step out of the dark and begin to live again. We often speak of dogs as loyal companions, but with shepherd dogs like Valor, it's more than loyalty. It's instinct, a quiet resolve, the ability to see wounds that human eyes cannot. Valor didn't need to speak, didn't need to judge, didn't need to explain. He simply stayed, observed, listened, and touched a heart at the moment it most needed to believe it was still worthy of love. In a world where pain is often hidden behind the mask of normalcy, dogs like Valor don't seek glory. They don't ask for recognition. They simply exist, quietly, patiently, as a reminder that some of the most beautiful things don't require words. Just an eye that knows when to pause, a touch that is warm enough, and a presence that arrives just in time to save a soul worn thin by silence. And perhaps the most precious gift a shepherd can bring is not duty, not skill, but trust, the kind that, once placed in the right hands, can save an entire life. As the May afternoon gently passed, the sunlight softly bathed the Colorado River, painting a tranquil and serene picture. The riverside bridge, sturdy and majestic, stretched across the powerful waters below. Rising 30 meters above, this bridge wasn't just an architectural structure, but a silent witness to countless stories and journeys from days long past, part of the landscape no one visiting Riverside would want to miss. Below the bridge, the Colorado River caressed its banks, small waves gently crashing against the rocks that jutted out from the water's surface, forming ripples that danced like whispers in the breeze. The water, crystal clear, mirrored the blue sky, resembling an eternal, natural mirror. The crisp, fresh air of spring slipped through the gaps in the lush green trees, creating an atmosphere of true relaxation, a space where anyone could find a moment of peace. The Riverside Bridge, with its ancient yet steadfast architecture, still stood tall, framing this breathtaking natural scene. The bricks, laid down many years ago, remained strong against the test of time, a symbol of persistence and endurance. Standing atop the bridge, one could gaze out and marvel at the mystical beauty of the Colorado River below, as if everything in the world was flowing by softly and peacefully. On such afternoons, when the last light of the day lingered on the surface of the water, Riverside Bridge became the perfect place for a leisurely walk. The slow footsteps and cheerful chatter of passers-by created a serene and peaceful atmosphere. A light breeze stirred the leaves, carrying the scent of earth and sky, making any worries or tension simply fade away. In this tranquil setting, Rebecca Morgan and Atlas, her young German Shepherd puppy, shared a perfect moment. Rebecca, 34 years old, was a passionate and dedicated veterinarian, deeply in love with animals. She lived a calm life in Riverside, not only treating the pets of the locals, but also caring for Atlas, the dog she loved like a close friend. Though her life often seemed routine with the work of tending to animals, every time she stepped out of the house with Atlas by her side, everything came alive with energy. Atlas, only 3 months old, was a lively puppy with large, curious eyes and the silky coat typical of a German Shepherd. Though young, Atlas displayed an insatiable curiosity about the world around him. The little dog bounced around excitedly, eager to explore every nook and cranny near the Riverside Bridge. His large ears, still unsteady, fluttered with excitement as he lifted his head to observe the world with gleaming eyes full of wonder. Just walking beside Rebecca, Atlas seemed to feel the freedom and vastness of the world. His light, happy steps, paired with his wagging tail, brought even more joy to the air. Atlas ran in circles, inhaling deeply to take in the sweet scent of flowers, feeling the breeze brush against him. The puppy's innocent joy was contagious, and Rebecca couldn't help but smile, especially when Atlas playfully leaped to catch a ball floating in the air, his eyes sparkling with joy, as if it were his own personal victory. At this moment, Atlas embodied playfulness and boundless energy. The puppy eagerly explored everything, from the fallen leaves to the birds flying overhead. Each was a small adventure in Atlas's eyes. His innocence and optimism made everything seem new, reminding Rebecca of the magic in life's simplest moments. As Rebecca watched Atlas, she felt a deep bond that had been forged since the first day she brought the tiny puppy home. When he had just opened his eyes, still fearful yet curious about the new world around him. Now, as she watched Atlas joyfully frolicking on the Riverside Bridge, her heart swelled with pride and happiness. The small, precious moments they shared made Rebecca feel that Atlas was an irreplaceable part of her life, the best companion she could ever have. The little dog ran on, his ears fluttering to the rhythm of his steps, his small but swift legs full of energy. Atlas darted across the bridge, his large eyes taking in everything around him as if it were a new world. Each of his steps seemed like a small adventure, and the gentle breeze only added to the freshness of the moment. The fresh air of the afternoon created a space of pure relaxation. The breeze stirred the leaves on the ancient trees along the path, carrying the delicate scent of nature's earth and fresh grass. The sun began to dip behind distant hills, casting a soft light that bathed the bridge and the flowing Colorado River below. The soft waves gently lapped against the shore, making the surroundings feel softer and more peaceful than ever before. Rebecca couldn't help but smile as she watched Atlas joyfully running across the bridge. She saw the little puppy excitedly breathing in the fresh air, the scents of grass, earth, and the flowing river filling his senses. It was as if Atlas was eagerly trying to collect each fragrance with pure fascination. His swift little feet pounded the ground, his tail wagging energetically, a clear expression of joy, as though the puppy was savoring every single moment in this world. Walking beside Atlas, Rebecca's heart swelled with love for this dog. Even though she was a veterinarian and had seen countless dogs in her daily work, nothing compared to the love she felt for Atlas. This puppy, so small yet so full of energy, had brought Rebecca a joy she could hardly put into words. She watched him with pride, especially when he stopped to tilt his head, sniffing the scents around him with curiosity. To Atlas, everything around him was new and full of mystery. He ran to the bushes along the path, turning his head back to check if Rebecca was still behind him. Even though Atlas occasionally ran a bit faster, he never got too far ahead. His sparkling eyes, glancing toward her, revealed an invisible bond, a silent gratitude, as though the puppy knew that Rebecca had led him into this world, a world full of wonders he was now exploring piece by piece. Rebecca smiled, her footsteps light as she followed Atlas, feeling the peace of the moment. The bond between her and Atlas needed no words. The simple actions and loving glances were enough to feel the depth of their connection. When Atlas looked back, his ears perked up, as if seeking a word of praise. Rebecca couldn't help but laugh. "Come on, Atlas," Rebecca said softly, walking beside him and gently brushing her hand over his head. "You're amazing, aren't you?" Atlas didn't respond, but his tail wagged in reply. And as the light of the setting sun bathed the riverside bridge in its golden glow, both Rebecca and Atlas continued their walk, sharing the quiet, beautiful peace they had found together. The fresh, cool air of the afternoon seemed to seep into every fiber of Rebecca's being, easing away the tension and worries in her heart. All that remained was this beautiful, promising moment, one that she and Atlas shared. However, that brief joy was shattered by an unexpected moment. From behind, a bicycle came speeding toward them, its wheels spinning quickly and the bell ringing, signaling the arrival of the rider. In that instant, Atlas froze. His tail stopped wagging, his large ears pricked up, listening intently. Though still unaware of the danger, his reaction was something no one could have anticipated. Suddenly, the bike rushed past at full speed. The rider didn't have time to slow down as he saw Atlas standing in his path. The shock was too much, and Atlas didn't have time to react. With a hasty jolt, Atlas was startled and frightened. His tail wagged violently as a natural reflex, but then, in an instant, an unavoidable accident occurred. The little dog pulled back too quickly, his legs unable to keep up, and in a split second, Atlas slipped and crashed into the bridge's railing. His body, light yet hurried, slid outward, just managing to grab hold of a thin wire of the railing. It seemed as though time had frozen, as Atlas desperately tried to hold on, but Rebecca's heart filled with helplessness as she witnessed the scene. In panic, Rebecca screamed out in desperation, "Atlas, no!" But her voice was drowned by the wind and the sound of the bike's engine fading away. She rushed toward the railing, breathless, without thinking, just desperate to reach her beloved puppy. Her hand stretched out, but in that brief moment, Atlas' neck slipped a little more, and the small dog's body vanished from her reach. Atlas' body fell into the open air, plummeting into the raging waters of the Colorado River below. A wave of pain washed over Rebecca. Her eyes widened, watching each brief breath that Atlas took, only to be swallowed by the swirling waves. Rebecca stood still, unable to believe what had just happened. The feeling of hopelessness was like a stone weighing heavy on her chest. Everything seemed to stop in that moment. She couldn't do anything. She couldn't save the puppy she loved. Tears began to fall, not from physical pain, but from the anguish of realizing she couldn't undo what had just happened. Rebecca bent down, taking a deep breath, trying to regain control, but the despair continued to rise. In that instant, all she could do was stare at the flowing water, feeling as though all hope had been swept away. The entire bridge seemed to fall silent. Passers-by, once preoccupied with their own lives, no longer noticed the world around them. Rebecca stood there, dazed and afraid, feeling an overwhelming loneliness, as if the Colorado River had carried away everything she had once cherished. The sight before Rebecca was almost too much to bear. A beloved puppy being swept away by the raging waters, leaving her gasping for breath. Her mind went blank, and all that remained were the crashing sounds of the river and her own frantic breaths. Then, suddenly, amidst the stillness and chaos in Rebecca's heart, a voice rang out, calm yet determined. "I will save that dog." Michael Chen, a 28-year-old kayaker, stood by the riverbank, his eyes fixed on the spot where Atlas had just fallen. Without hesitation, he sprang into action. Michael, an experienced kayaker who had faced countless challenges in his life, had never felt such urgency before. No one could stop him now. In a single moment, he launched his kayak into the swift currents. He paddled hard, each stroke propelling the kayak deeper into the turbulent waters. The Colorado River was no longer as gentle as Rebecca had once seen. The waves were fierce, crashing and frothing with white foam, the waters pushing Michael's boat toward the spot where Atlas had fallen. But Michael remained unshaken. He focused on each stroke, his body resilient and strong, his eyes always on the water, searching for Atlas. The determination in Michael's actions reflected the perseverance he had learned through years of kayaking. He had saved countless animals trapped in dangerous situations, but this time, everything felt much more challenging. The river raged more violently than ever, as though testing him, but Michael's resolve never wavered. While rescue workers were still on their way, he was the only hope left to save Atlas. Despite the powerful current that threatened to pull him away, Michael kept paddling, pushing himself further. He had been through more treacherous waters than this, but never had he felt such urgency as now, when the little dog was struggling against the river and could disappear at any moment. The scene felt like a battle between life and death, and Michael couldn't give up. The riverbank blurred in Rebecca's eyes as she watched Michael travel farther down the river. She knew that all hope now rested in his hands, in each relentless stroke he made. She stood in silence, watching, praying silently, hoping that Michael would accomplish the impossible. Though the current continued to push Michael's kayak away, he stayed on course. And then, in a moment that felt like a miracle, Michael saw Atlas. The puppy was struggling to stay afloat, each wave pushing him further down, but Michael didn't hesitate. He paddled harder, carefully navigating the rocks beneath the water's surface. He was so close now, just a little further. From a distance, Michael could hear the sound of Atlas's labored breathing, a faint bark echoing in the quiet of the afternoon. There was no time to think. Michael paddled faster. When he finally reached the spot, he maneuvered the kayak toward the shore, careful but swift, and reached out for Atlas. The little puppy, weak and soaked, still recognized Michael's presence. With what little strength he had left, Atlas managed to push himself up, placing his front paws on the bow of the kayak. Michael gently pulled Atlas onto the boat, and in that moment, everything seemed to calm. Atlas, exhausted, paused in this fleeting moment of peace, while Michael let out a sigh of relief. Rebecca could hardly contain her emotions when she saw Atlas safe. She rushed toward the riverbank, unable to take her eyes off the scene of Michael rescuing Atlas. Her eyes were filled with tears, not out of fear, but from the overwhelming joy swelling inside her heart. She knew that in this moment, Atlas had been saved, and the incredible journey between her and this little puppy had just turned the page to a new chapter. As Michael pulled Atlas onto the boat, the puppy was soaked, his eyes wide but still dull, as if he hadn't fully comprehended what had just happened. Atlas's small body trembled from the cold, but there were no signs of serious injuries. Michael stared at the puppy in disbelief, unable to process what he was seeing. In his heart, astonishment was beyond words. A fall from 30 meters, a river with roaring currents. Such a shock could have easily taken any life. Yet here was Atlas, alive. Michael sat down on the boat, keeping Atlas close to him, his eyes glued to the puppy in his hands. He checked Atlas carefully, turning him over, searching for any signs of injury or bruising. Miraculously, there were no serious injuries, no wounds, no bleeding, not even a broken bone. Just a little cold, a little exhaustion. But Atlas' vitality remained intact, as if the river had never touched him. "No way," Michael whispered, his eyes never leaving Atlas. He wasn't sure whether to feel elated or stunned. Throughout his years as a kayaker, he had witnessed countless emergencies and saved many creatures, but he had never encountered anything like this. Atlas hadn't just survived. He seemed completely unaffected by the horrific accident. As the boat neared the shore, Rebecca stood waiting, unable to wait any longer to embrace Atlas. She ran toward the boat with her arms outstretched, and in that moment, she and Atlas reunited in a warm embrace. Atlas looked up at her, his tired eyes still gleaming with familiarity, as if sensing the safety within her arms. "Atlas," Rebecca choked on his name, tears flowing freely. "You're alive, Atlas. You're alive." As if recognizing Rebecca's love and worry, Atlas shook his head lightly, scattering the droplets of water. Still clinging to his fur, then nestled into her arms. The warmth from Rebecca's body calmed him, and he let out a soft groan from his throat, as though trying to convey his fatigue, but also his sense of reassurance. Rebecca felt her body relax in that moment. A sense of relief, joy, and gratitude overwhelmed her. She cradled Atlas in her arms, feeling each breath of the puppy, resting her head against his fur and gently stroking him. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of fear. Rather, they were tears of joy, because the precious life of Atlas had been saved. Michael stood quietly beside them, smiling as he watched them. He didn't say a word, but his eyes spoke volumes. He felt proud to have saved Atlas in time, and it seemed as though the world around them had witnessed a true miracle. Rebecca hugged Atlas tighter, not wanting to let go. "We made it, didn't we, Atlas? You're a real warrior." Atlas lifted his head, looking at her with eyes that shone with weariness, yet it was as if he was answering her with a gentle wag of his tail. Though exhausted, the light in Atlas's eyes never faded. The tail, though weak, gave a little wag, as if to say, "I'm okay, and I'll always be by your side, Rebecca." This miraculous moment wasn't just about Atlas's survival. It was the bond between these two beings that had grown stronger than ever before. A bond unspoken, needing no proof, yet firm enough to help them overcome anything. Atlas was not just a puppy. He was Rebecca's loyal companion, her fiercest partner in this life. Rebecca couldn't help but notice the change in Atlas's body. Although the little dog appeared tired, the resilience in his every move was evident. Atlas began to sit up, softly whining, but then, almost immediately, he squirmed and tried to stand. Though his legs were somewhat weak, each step Atlas took was filled with bravery and determination. Rebecca watched each movement of Atlas, amazed. She knew the puppy was still young and had not fully recovered from the fall, but the vitality in Atlas, his unwillingness to give up, made her feel immense pride. She gently stroked Atlas's back, seeing the calmness slowly return to his face. She no longer saw just a little puppy. She saw a small warrior regaining his strength. The next day, Atlas showed rapid signs of recovery. Rebecca observed his every action as he ran around the small backyard behind their house. His tail wagged continuously, and his eyes shone with joy, as if nothing had ever happened. Even though his left leg was a bit limp, Atlas's agility seemed largely unaffected. He still chased the ball, as full of life as any puppy. Rebecca also began noticing some unusual behaviors from Atlas. One afternoon, as they were walking in the yard, Atlas suddenly stopped mid-run, his ears perked up, his little nose sniffing the air. His eyes seemed to be staring at something far away, something only he could see. Rebecca followed Atlas's gaze, but there was nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual bushes, nothing special. Yet, just a moment later, a strong breeze blew from the south, carrying with it a light drizzle. Atlas immediately turned and ran toward Rebecca, as though trying to tell her something. He stopped in front of her, looked back at the gloomy sky, then shook his head, seemingly understanding that something was about to happen. Rebecca furrowed her brows, unsure, but as she stepped inside the house, the rain suddenly began to pour down, as if Atlas had sensed it before any signs appeared. This wasn't the first time Atlas had shown such odd reactions. Earlier, while they were sitting in the living room, Atlas suddenly began running in circles, barking and staring at the door. Rebecca couldn't understand why, but soon after, the doorbell rang. She opened it to find an old friend visiting. This event only made Rebecca more certain of the special ability that Atlas seemed to possess. Day by day, Atlas's strange behaviors became more pronounced. It was as though this little puppy could sense things that others couldn't. Rebecca gradually realized that the changes in Atlas weren't just signs of recovery from the accident. They were signs of a special ability that she couldn't fully explain. These signs were becoming clearer, and Rebecca began to wonder whether the fall from Riverside Bridge was truly just an accident, or if it was the event that opened a new chapter in Atlas's life. At first, Rebecca thought it was just a coincidence. Atlas had started showing strange behaviors that she couldn't quite explain. One afternoon, with the sky still a vibrant blue and the sun casting soft rays onto the garden, Atlas suddenly stood still in the middle of the yard. His ears perked up, and his little nose sniffed the air intently. The puppy didn't move, unaffected by anything around him, as though he was listening for something that couldn't be seen by the eye. Rebecca turned to look at Atlas, but she saw nothing unusual. She assumed he was simply reacting to the changing wind. But just a few minutes later, the sky suddenly darkened. A light storm unexpectedly rolled in, bringing strong winds and a light rain. Although Atlas still stood still, his eyes seemed fixed on the distance, where the storm was beginning to form. Rebecca couldn't help but be amazed as she realized that Atlas had sensed the storm before it happened. The puppy didn't bark or run to find shelter. He simply stood there, as if he understood that something was about to happen. Each time something like this occurred, Rebecca felt a little surprised, unable to understand why Atlas could sense the changes in the environment, things that only humans would typically notice. One day, as they took a walk in a nearby park, Atlas displayed another strange behavior. The puppy suddenly stopped and stared intently at a group of people playing sports. Rebecca, distracted by a conversation with a friend, hadn't noticed Atlas's actions. But then, suddenly, Atlas barked, his bark loud and full of concern. She turned to see a man from the group lying motionless on the ground. The little puppy had already recognized that something was wrong and had barked to warn them. Rebecca rushed over and discovered that the man had collapsed from a heart attack. The people around him didn't know what to do, but Rebecca quickly called for an ambulance and began administering first aid. It wasn't until she had done everything necessary that she realized Atlas had sensed the danger before she even noticed it. From that moment on, Atlas's strange behaviors became even more pronounced. The puppy didn't just bark before something unusual happened. He also showed an incredible ability to sense the health conditions of those around him. On another occasion, when Rebecca was checking a cat's health in the clinic, Atlas suddenly ran up to the cat and stood still, staring at it intently. His eyes grew serious, and he began to bark softly. Rebecca didn't understand at first, but when she checked the cat again, she discovered a sign of illness that she hadn't noticed before. These signs, though they seemed like random actions, made Rebecca feel that something beyond her understanding was happening. Atlas was not just a smart puppy. He seemed to have an ability to perceive things that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. The change in his behavior couldn't be a coincidence. It seemed as though the little puppy had developed a special ability after his fall from Riverside Bridge. Rebecca began to wonder if the fall wasn't just an accident, but a turning point that unlocked a new power in Atlas. She questioned whether the fall had activated a latent ability within him, or if the puppy had always possessed it and simply hadn't had the chance to display it. However, there was no denying that Atlas's abilities went far beyond anything she could have imagined. The wonder in his actions made Rebecca begin to see things differently. Perhaps this little puppy wasn't just special because of the bond they shared, but also because of abilities that Atlas himself may not even know he had. One beautiful weekend day, as Rebecca and Atlas were strolling through the park near their home, more strange events began to unfold. This time, Atlas wasn't just sniffing the familiar scents of the grass and trees. He was also glancing continuously toward the nearby pool. Several families had gathered, children laughing and playing around the pool area. Rebecca, unaware, continued walking beside Atlas, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the pleasant atmosphere. But then, in a moment Rebecca didn't notice, Atlas suddenly stopped. The puppy stood perfectly still, his eyes wide and his ears perked up, as if he were sensing something out of the ordinary. Rebecca turned to look at Atlas, furrowing her brow, unsure what had made the little puppy so tense. But then, she heard a scream from the direction of the pool. A child, about 6 years old, playing near the water, suddenly lost their footing and fell into the pool. Water splashed up in a frenzy, and the child began to sink, leaving only small waves breaking against the shore. Panic erupted in the air. The adults around screamed and rushed forward, but no one could do anything in that moment. Rebecca turned back, her eyes wide with horror, looking toward the child struggling in the water. She immediately rushed toward the poolside, but suddenly something unexpected happened. Atlas, with incredible agility, leaped into the water without hesitation. Rebecca's eyes widened in shock as she saw Atlas, her beloved little puppy, not hesitate for a moment before throwing himself into the cold, rushing water. The puppy swam with such strength and determination that everyone around him stood frozen in disbelief. No barking, no hesitation. Atlas simply knew that a life was in danger, and he was the only one who could do something about it. Each stroke was powerful, his back legs kicking steadily, and no wave could stop the resilience in his every movement. As Rebecca rushed to the poolside, her eyes never leaving the sight of Atlas swimming toward the child, she felt something strong and miraculous in his actions. The people around could only watch, unable to understand why a little puppy would act so quickly and decisively. Atlas showed no fear. He was entirely focused on one thing: saving the child. The little puppy reached the child, who was struggling to stay afloat, gasping for air, her eyes wide with panic. But Atlas had made it in time. With all his strength, Atlas reached out and grabbed the child's hand with his mouth. In what seemed like a moment that slowed down, Atlas and the child swam together toward the shore. Rebecca could hardly believe her eyes when she saw that Atlas had pulled the child safely to the shore, despite being completely exhausted himself. The whole park seemed to fall silent as everyone witnessed Atlas save the child. When the puppy placed the child down, the adults quickly rushed to check on her, helping her breathe and comforting her. But all eyes turned back to Atlas, who was now panting heavily and wagging his tail weakly, as if to say, "I did it." Those around him were amazed and astounded. A little puppy, with unbelievable strength, had just saved a life. Rebecca ran to Atlas, urgently pulling him into her arms. "You did it, Atlas," she gasped, her voice choked with emotion. She could hardly believe her eyes. Atlas, still just a puppy, had done the impossible. She held him tightly, unable to stop the tears of happiness rolling down her cheeks. "You're amazing, Atlas," she whispered. Atlas, tired but still wagging his tail, weak as it was, kept it moving, as if feeling the endless love and gratitude from Rebecca. The little puppy had done the unthinkable, and now, not only Rebecca, but everyone who had witnessed it, believed that Atlas had a special ability, one that far exceeded what humans could explain. The bond between them grew even deeper. Moments like this made Rebecca feel that Atlas wasn't just a loyal companion, but a creature with miraculous powers she couldn't yet fully understand. But Atlas's strangeness didn't end there. One morning, when Rebecca and Atlas were out for their usual walk, she noticed another unusual behavior from the little puppy. As they walked through the small forest near their house, Atlas suddenly stopped, his eyes bright, his little nose twitching as he sniffed the air. At first, Rebecca thought Atlas was simply catching a new scent, but when she looked more closely, she saw that Atlas's eyes seemed to be staring at something far off, as though he was sensing something that couldn't be seen. The little puppy began to move anxiously, pacing back and forth, stopping, then backing away, only to suddenly freeze, his head raised high, ears perked as if listening to an invisible sound that only he could hear. Rebecca looked around, but saw nothing unusual. There was no strong wind, no changes in the environment around her. "Atlas, what's wrong?" Rebecca asked, walking closer and bending down to look at the little puppy. But Atlas only continued to stare ahead, his eyes locked onto a specific spot. A feeling of unease rose in Rebecca's chest. She didn't understand what was happening, but something about the moment made her feel uneasy. As she was about to pull Atlas along to continue walking, a sudden strong gust of wind blew, bringing with it a chill in the air. Before she could think any further, Rebecca heard the whistling of the trees and the sound of earth and rocks shifting beneath her feet. It felt as though the ground beneath her was starting to tremble, a strong shock that nearly caused her to lose her balance. "Oh no!" Rebecca gasped, realizing it was an earthquake. The tremors grew stronger, and dark clouds rapidly gathered above the sky, as if foreshadowing the impending disaster. Everything around them seemed to fall into chaos in an instant. However, while everyone around them began to panic, Atlas stood firm, his eyes locked ahead as if he had already known this was coming. Rebecca stared at Atlas in disbelief. "You knew?" she whispered, unable to believe her eyes. A feeling of anxiety gripped her as she saw the little puppy stand strong while the ground beneath her shook violently. The earthquake intensified, and strange noises echoed around them. Trees toppled, rocks tumbled down from the nearby hills, but Atlas remained still, his gaze unwavering, calm and alert. There was no fear in his eyes, only complete focus on the earth's every movement, as though Atlas could sense every shift around him, even the invisible waves that humans couldn't perceive. When the earthquake finally subsided, Rebecca felt her heart racing faster than usual. She turned to look at Atlas, and once again his gaze met hers, as if to say, "We're safe now." She bent down, gently stroking the puppy, her heart filled with awe and gratitude. "You're amazing, Atlas." Rebecca no longer doubted it. Atlas not only had the ability to sense changes in his environment, but could also perceive natural phenomena that humans couldn't detect. This little puppy, small and fragile, possessed a power far beyond what she could have imagined. The miracle of that moment made Rebecca feel her connection to Atlas stronger than ever. This little puppy was not just a companion, but a special creature with extraordinary abilities. And as time went on, she began to understand that the fall from Riverside Bridge was not just an accident, but a sign of a new, miraculous journey that she and Atlas would share together. However, this happiness and wonder didn't last long, as Rebecca began to realize that Atlas had attracted the attention of many people, not just in the community, but from larger organizations with differing motives. One evening, while Rebecca was tidying up in the clinic, a man suddenly appeared at her doorstep. He wore a long coat, looked quite formal, but his demeanor seemed somewhat secretive. As he entered the clinic, Rebecca didn't recognize him. He introduced himself as Dr. Carter, an animal research specialist, and mentioned that he had heard about Atlas's special abilities and wanted to learn more. Rebecca immediately felt that something was off. From the way Dr. Carter spoke and the probing questions he asked about Atlas, she sensed an underlying lack of transparency in his words. The unease grew within her. She had heard of large scientific research organizations, ones that focused on the study of extraordinary animals, and she couldn't help but worry that Atlas could become the subject of some ruthless exploitation. This puppy was not an object to be experimented on. He was a living being with emotions, a personality, and a separate life of his own. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She sat up in the quiet room, her eyes fixed on Atlas, who lay next to the bed, tired after a long day of playing. She gently stroked his fur and wondered if she should protect Atlas from those who might want to take advantage of him. Her worry deepened as she recalled Atlas's strange behaviors, abilities that no other dog should possess. The next day, while Rebecca was at the veterinary clinic, a group of strangers arrived. They introduced themselves as part of the Special Creatures Research Network, a secret organization studying animals with unique abilities. They claimed they had heard of Atlas and wanted to discuss researching the abilities this little dog possessed. But Rebecca could sense something wasn't right. Their questions about Atlas were too specific, too well-researched, as if they had already studied this puppy in detail. She could no longer remain silent. Rebecca immediately refused and demanded that they leave. However, the research group wasn't so easily deterred. They insisted that Atlas was a precious specimen and that the research would bring great benefits to the scientific community. But in her heart, Rebecca knew they were not merely researchers. They were people trying to exploit Atlas for purposes she couldn't accept. After the group left, Rebecca couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. She felt as though she was standing at an important crossroads, where she had to decide whether to continue protecting Atlas from these potential dangers. How could she ensure that Atlas wouldn't be abused or exploited because of his special abilities? She couldn't allow her puppy to become a test subject, a tool for shady research. Rebecca felt like she was facing a great challenge, and this time, it wasn't just about protecting Atlas's health. It was about protecting his freedom and his right to live a normal life. She was determined not to let anyone harm Atlas, whether for personal gain or scientific research. At the same time, Rebecca began to realize that Atlas's story was spreading beyond the Riverside community, and more people wanted to study this extraordinary dog's abilities. This realization filled her with fear and loneliness as she faced larger forces, people with the ability to exploit every potential Atlas possessed. The dog she loved, whom she considered her child, had now become a subject of research, not for his lovable qualities, but for the magical power within him. Rebecca could not sit idly by and watch everything around Atlas change so rapidly. Her encounters with the research team were becoming increasingly tense and stressful. Each time they appeared, she felt as though she were being pushed into a battle she wasn't prepared for. She began to notice the vague promises they made. They assured her they would not exploit Atlas, claiming they only wanted to study and understand the abilities of animals. But Rebecca could sense something was wrong, a hidden agenda in every conversation. One afternoon, the research team came to her clinic again. This time they brought with them a long contract, full of complicated terms that Rebecca couldn't immediately understand. It was a research contract, but what worried her was the price that Atlas would have to pay for this research. They wanted complete control over Atlas to put him into a long-term research program without her explicit consent. They called it a long-term project and promised to compensate her for her cooperation. Rebecca felt her body freeze as she read the terms. She could not allow this to happen. She could not let Atlas become a tool for experimentation, to explore abilities he had no knowledge of. He was not an object to be tested, not something to be exploited. She had realized that there was a fight to be fought to protect Atlas, to prevent the puppy from paying the price for the gains of people who had no genuine affection for him. "This is unacceptable," Rebecca said firmly, her hands tightly gripping the contract. "Atlas is not your test subject. I will not sign this." The research team exchanged glances, sharp eyes full of intent. One man, who appeared to be the leader, dressed in a black suit and wearing a cold expression, began to reveal his dissatisfaction. "You don't understand," the man said, his voice soft but powerful. "We don't just want to help. We can take this project to a new level, something you can't achieve on your own. We're talking about changing the way we understand animals. This is an opportunity you can't miss, not just for you, but for the world." Rebecca took a step back, feeling the pressure from the man. But she wasn't afraid. Everything had become clear. Not only for Atlas, but for herself, Rebecca knew she had to stand her ground, no matter the challenges she faced. She couldn't let them control Atlas's life. This puppy, with abilities far beyond what humans could understand, was not a tool for their experiments. "This dog has the right to freedom and to live a normal life," Rebecca replied, her voice strong. "I will not sell his soul to you. If you want to do research, do it with other animals, not Atlas." The research team said nothing more, but they didn't leave immediately. They began talking about experiments and the benefits Atlas could bring. But Rebecca didn't let them pull her into that conversation. She knew that if she wasn't firm now, there would never be another chance to protect Atlas. Just then, Michael walked into the clinic. He had been visiting her frequently since he saved Atlas, and now he immediately sensed the tension in the room. The research team looked toward him, but Michael showed no fear. He walked over to Rebecca and looked at the team. "Rebecca is right," Michael spoke up, his voice unwavering. "If you want to approach Atlas, you'll have to go through me first. She has raised and cared for this dog like family, and we won't let you exploit him. If you don't leave, we won't hesitate to call the police." The room fell silent for a long moment. The researchers could feel the unyielding firmness and protection that Rebecca and Michael had for Atlas. One of them finally stood up and nodded, signaling to the others to prepare to leave. Rebecca let out a sigh of relief as they turned and walked out. But she knew this was only the beginning. She had protected Atlas this time, but the fight was far from over. The research team would not give up so easily, and Rebecca had to be ready to face even greater challenges in the future. However, despite knowing that Atlas's safety was far from guaranteed, Rebecca couldn't help but feel happiness when she saw the puppy healthy and surviving it all. The next day, as Rebecca and Atlas strolled through the park near Lake Carson, All her worries seemed to be temporarily washed away. The peaceful scenery, the warm sunlight of spring stretching across the surface of the lake, created a serene atmosphere. Both Atlas and Rebecca enjoyed these gentle moments, while people around them relaxed and unwound under the shade of the trees. But suddenly, a scream broke through the tranquil air. "Help!" a woman's voice cried out in panic. Rebecca turned and saw a young girl waving her hands from the middle of the lake. Her feet were no longer touching the bottom, and it was clear she was in danger. Rebecca didn't think twice. She immediately rushed toward the lake, her eyes fixed on the girl flailing in the gentle waves. But just as she quickened her pace toward the water, Atlas, the playful little dog she always trusted, did something she never expected. He turned to look at her with a determined gaze, and without hesitation, Atlas dashed across the grass, weaving through the crowd and straight into the lake. Without a hint of fear, Atlas swam immediately toward the girl, who was slowly sinking beneath the surface. People around them began to panic, but no one reacted in time. Rebecca could only shout a desperate "No!" But then, she realized Atlas' actions were more precise and decisive than anyone else's. The little puppy didn't hesitate, didn't fear the cold water or the strong waves. He only focused on saving the person. Atlas swam closer, powering through the water with each stroke, his strong back legs kicking against the waves. He didn't look toward the shore, his focus solely on the child struggling beneath the surface. In the clear blue water, Rebecca saw Atlas, small in size, but filled with strength and unwavering determination. Within seconds, Atlas reached the girl, helping her stay afloat in the water. The puppy's tiny body seemed to be lifted by some unexplainable force, as though he knew exactly what to do. He swam while gently pulling the girl's arm with his mouth, guiding her toward the shore. Onlookers stood still, unable to believe their eyes as they watched this scene unfold. A little puppy, though small, had saved a life in the most crucial moment. When Atlas pushed the girl to safety on the shore, Rebecca rushed over, kneeling beside the girl. The girl's legs trembled, but she was clearly alive. She gasped for breath, sitting against the shore, eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, dog," the girl choked, her hands wrapping around Atlas as the puppy silently stood beside her, waiting for recognition. Rebecca couldn't hold back her emotions. She hugged Atlas tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You did so well," she whispered, her heart filled with pride and gratitude. Atlas gently nuzzled against her chest, his tail wagging weakly as if he too knew that he had done something miraculous. The people around stood stunned, many unable to understand how a little puppy could act so quickly and precisely. They looked at each other, sensing the miracle in every action Atlas had taken. The small dog not only saved the girl, but also made everyone who witnessed it reflect on the unimaginable. This simple act of rescue carried with it a powerful message about courage, loyalty, and the extraordinary abilities that Atlas possessed. These abilities were no longer just a coincidence. They were a part of Atlas, something that had formed in the puppy after the miraculous experiences only he could truly understand. Rebecca could no longer deny that Atlas was a special creature, and more, she felt honored to accompany him on this journey. As news of Atlas saving the girl spread beyond the riverside community, everything began to change. From the neighbors to Rebecca's friends, everyone had heard about Atlas's heroic act. But what made the story even more miraculous was how it spread beyond the small borders of Riverside, reaching farther regions where people who had never known Atlas were also drawn to the invisible strength this little puppy had. When an article about Atlas was published in the local newspaper, it quickly attracted attention. The story of how Atlas saved the drowning girl, acting quickly and precisely, was so unbelievable, it left many people in awe. But what truly made them believe in the story wasn't just the surprise. It was the belief in the extraordinary power that Atlas possessed. A short video of Atlas rescuing the girl was uploaded to social media, and within a day, it gained thousands of shares and comments. People began to ask whether Atlas could sense dangers before they happened. The questions poured in, and a small group of animal lovers, especially those studying animal behavior, began to pay attention to Atlas. They wanted to explore the miraculous sensing abilities this little puppy displayed and find a way to explain the strange phenomena Atlas was showing. Rebecca couldn't help but notice the dramatic shift in how people viewed Atlas, from casual greetings. During their walks, people now stopped to talk to her and Atlas, asking about the supernatural abilities the dog was exhibiting. Many began to see Atlas as a hero in the community. She overheard comments like, "Thank this dog. Without it, she wouldn't be here." Or, "Unbelievable. Atlas definitely has a special ability that we can't fully comprehend." Rebecca couldn't help but feel proud, yet a sense of unease grew within her as the attention began to swell. She knew that this newfound fame could bring danger, not only to Atlas but to herself as well. Research organizations and scientists began approaching her with proposals for collaboration, promising to involve Atlas in studies for the benefit of the community. However, deep down, Rebecca couldn't shake her growing concern. She didn't want Atlas to be exploited for the extraordinary abilities the puppy possessed. Atlas wasn't a research tool. He was a living being with emotions and the right to live freely. The constant feeling of being watched weighed heavily on Rebecca. She began to feel that Atlas's rising fame was turning the little puppy into a subject for exploitation. On one hand, she felt proud of everything Atlas had done, but on the other hand, she had to face the reality that the more people learned of his abilities, the more they wanted to explore and exploit them. Rebecca could no longer stay silent. She decided that she would do everything in her power to protect Atlas from the potential dangers that lay ahead. She knew that Atlas's strange abilities were a miracle, but they could also put him into the hands of people with less than noble intentions. While Atlas became a hero in the eyes of the community, Rebecca found herself facing greater challenges than ever before. Her dog was no longer just a part of the family. He had become a symbol of courage and the ability to transcend limits. And while the world outside continued to admire and praise Atlas, Rebecca knew that her work had only just begun. She had to do whatever it took to protect Atlas, ensuring that he could live a peaceful life, free from exploitation or intrusion. The sleepless nights weighed heavily on Rebecca, as she couldn't stop thinking about the changes unfolding in Atlas's life. The more attention the puppy drew, the more it seemed to attract the interest of research organizations. Offers of collaboration, invitations from research institutes, and even advice from scientists, all of it made her feel cornered. However, in recent days, she had noticed a disturbing shift in the behavior of the research team she had previously rejected. An increasing sense of unease grew within her. One morning, while Rebecca was tidying up the clinic, Michael came to visit and handed her a newspaper. On the front page was an image of Atlas, accompanied by the headline, "Miraculous Dog Saves Lives. Extraordinary Abilities Await Study." The story of Atlas had not only become a legend within the Riverside community, but had also drawn the attention of the scientific community. What worried Rebecca even more, though, was the fact that a secretive, unidentified organization had started to covertly monitor Atlas. Michael had noticed several suspicious signs in recent days. He mentioned that he had seen strange cars parked near Rebecca's house, with groups of well-dressed individuals standing in the distance, observing without ever engaging with anyone. They weren't ordinary visitors, and they had no clear reason to be near Atlas. Michael couldn't shake the growing concern about what might happen next. A rising sense of fear enveloped Rebecca as she realized that this organization was infiltrating their lives more and more. They were no longer simply sending invitations or reasonable proposals. They were quietly tracking every movement of Atlas. Their secretive appearances made Rebecca feel like she was living in a nightmare. She couldn't allow these people to get close to Atlas, knowing they wouldn't stop until they had absolute control over the puppy. Rebecca and Michael began to realize they weren't just protecting Atlas from unauthorized research. They were up against a real threat. A secretive organization was trying to kidnap Atlas and exploit his supernatural abilities. One late evening, while they were discussing things in Rebecca's small house, Michael looked into her eyes and said, "We have to do something. We can't wait until it's too late." Rebecca nodded, her heart filled with determination. She couldn't let Atlas be taken away as a test subject. This puppy wasn't just a part of the family, he was a real friend, one she had to protect at all costs. She and Michael decided they would act immediately, planning to safeguard Atlas from the pursuit of this secret organization. The two began gathering information about the mysterious research group. They tracked every lead, from the unidentified cars to the darkly dressed individuals Rebecca had seen during her business trips. A few short phone conversations with Dr. Wilson, a trusted veterinarian, helped them gather some crucial information. Dr. Wilson had also realized that this group wasn't made up of ordinary scientists. Everything about them seemed mysterious, with ill intentions lurking beneath their inquiries. Michael and Rebecca knew they needed to stop engaging with this research team and find a way to deceive them, keeping Atlas out of their hands. Rebecca understood that she had to keep Atlas safe, and a confrontation was inevitable. The two began devising a plan to free Atlas from the clutches of those who wanted to exploit him. As each day passed, the tension continued to rise. The secretive research group relentlessly tracked every move of Rebecca and Atlas. They appeared in hidden spots, using advanced surveillance methods to monitor every action of the little puppy. Rebecca could feel the danger growing as this group not only wanted to study Atlas, but were willing to do anything to seize him, making her more resolute than ever before. One morning, as Rebecca was preparing for a short trip with Atlas, Michael called her, his voice filled with concern. "We can't wait any longer. They know where we're going. If we keep going like this, we won't be able to protect Atlas for much longer." A wave of anxiety washed over Rebecca, but she quickly regained her composure. "We need to leave. Immediately. No traces, no attention," she replied, her voice filled with determination. They had planned ahead. Leave the house right away, leaving no signs for the research group to follow. Rebecca and Michael had everything prepared to keep Atlas undetected. They quietly left the house, ensuring all windows and doors were closed, and made sure to take everything needed to keep Atlas safe during the journey. Michael drove, while Rebecca sat beside him, cautiously observing everything around them. Strange cars still passed by, but none stopped for long. Everything seemed normal, but Rebecca knew they couldn't let their guard down for even a second. In this tense moment, Atlas lay silently at Rebecca's feet, sensing the unease in the air. The puppy knew something was wrong, continuously glancing around, his eyes full of alertness. Rebecca gently petted Atlas, trying to reassure him. "We'll be fine, Atlas. Stay close, and we won't let anyone hurt you." But just when they thought they had escaped their pursuers, an SUV belonging to the research group suddenly appeared behind them. A black SUV, with people dressed in dark clothing, just like before. Michael quickly glanced in the rearview mirror. He knew the research group was following them. There was no time to hesitate. "Go!" Rebecca shouted in that brief moment. Michael slammed the gas pedal, and the car shot down the empty road, with the black SUV immediately accelerating behind them. A tense chase had begun. "Don't worry, I'll shake them off," Michael said, his voice calm but full of determination. He steered the car onto a narrow road, weaving through alleys and paths. Though the SUV continued to follow, Michael did something few would expect. He led them off the main road, into less traveled areas, making it harder for them to keep up. Rebecca looked at Atlas, unable to hide her worry. The puppy remained calm, but his eyes were bright, always on alert, as though he knew something bigger was happening. "You don't have to worry, Atlas," Rebecca whispered, reassuring him. The chase continued through deserted streets, the cars speeding through dark corners. Michael used all his driving experience to make sure the SUV lost their trail. When they turned into a forest area, Michael drove the car into an empty parking lot inside, where they could lie low for a moment. They sat in the car, not daring to make a sound. They listened to the surrounding noises, waiting for silence. Michael turned to look at Rebecca and Atlas, his gaze filled with tension, but also a bit of relief. "We've lost them," he said. But deep down, both knew this confrontation was far from over. It was just the first step of a longer battle. Rebecca let out a sigh of relief, but she couldn't shake the lingering feeling of unease. "Thank you, Michael," she said, gently patting his hand. "But we can't stop. They won't give up?" Michael nodded in agreement. They both knew a plan had to be put into action. Rebecca and Michael would not let Atlas fall into the hands of those who wanted to exploit this special puppy. Their escape had officially begun. But just as they were fleeing and trying to keep Atlas safe, something else happened that completely changed the situation. One damp morning, when the heavy clouds refused to leave the sky, Rebecca received an urgent call from the rescue team. A hiker, a long-distance walker, had gone missing in the nearby forest. The storm from the previous night had made the terrain difficult to navigate, and the constant rain had reduced visibility. The rescue team had been searching all night, but could not reach the missing person's location. The terrain was too treacherous, and there were few clear traces to follow. Rebecca listened to the call, and without hesitation she turned to Michael. "We need to go find this person. I need Atlas to help. He can sense things we can't." Michael immediately understood, and said nothing more. They had been preparing for moments like this. Rebecca scooped Atlas up once more, feeling the puppy's calm, steady breathing in her arms. She could feel the special nature of the dog, the abilities that she herself couldn't fully comprehend. When they reached the forest, Rebecca saw Atlas begin to show strange signs. The little puppy, usually so playful, no longer ran around like usual, but began to stop and sniff the ground, the grass, the air. Rebecca watched as Atlas lifted his head, his eyes bright and his ears raised high. She couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder as the little dog started moving in a direction she hadn't anticipated. Atlas was leading the way. "Follow Atlas," Rebecca said to Michael, her voice full of trust. The dog was not simply finding a path, but also picking up on traces humans couldn't detect. Rebecca followed Atlas closely, her eyes never leaving the puppy's every move. Atlas continued to run, his long legs moving quickly through the thick underbrush, no obstacles slowing him down. Michael followed closely behind, unable to take his eyes off the little dog. Atlas didn't stop. His eyes were always fixed ahead. The puppy was doing something only he could do, using his biological sensing abilities to lead them through the forest. Every time Atlas paused, he sniffed the air, and then surged forward as if he could feel where danger or a person might be. Rebecca and Michael followed Atlas, walking along a faint trail beneath the ancient trees. The cool, damp air of the forest made their journey even harder. Cold winds swept through, and every step they took seemed to test their endurance as the terrain became steeper. But Atlas didn't hesitate, his small paws carrying him steadily forward. The puppy knew exactly where to go. An hour later, as the sunlight began to fade, Atlas suddenly stopped. The three of them paused, and Rebecca looked around, noticing that everything seemed silent. Atlas stood still, his ears high, his eyes locked on a spot ahead where a patch of thick grass lay. The puppy jumped into a thicket where the ground had been disturbed, signs that someone had passed through recently. Atlas began to whine softly, as if indicating the person's location. "We're close," Rebecca said, though she couldn't believe what Atlas was doing. Somehow this little puppy was leading them to the right place. Rebecca followed Atlas, and soon she realized there was another trail, one along a creek, leading to a higher area with a wide clearing. As they got closer to that area, they saw a small figure lying still on the wet ground, a man unconscious, unable to move. Rebecca rushed over, and Michael quickly checked the hiker's pulse. "Thank God he's alive," Michael sighed, wiping the sweat from his brow. The three of them knew that without Atlas, they never would have found the hiker in the pouring rain and dense forest. Atlas stood beside them, his eyes fixed on the hiker. After a moment, the puppy gently placed his mouth on the man's hand, as if trying to help him get up. Though unable to speak, Atlas's action carried a deep meaning. "You're safe now, and we won't leave anyone behind." Rebecca lifted the hiker and quickly called for an ambulance. Meanwhile, Michael gently patted Atlas's back, unable to contain the swell of pride in his heart. "You did great, Atlas," he said, his eyes full of respect. One day, as Rebecca was preparing for a typical morning, she received an unwelcome call from Dr. Elelena Reeves, a renowned expert in animal cognition research. Dr. Reeves was one of the leading scientists in the study of animal perception and communication, and her name had appeared several times in articles about Atlas. She was the one the scientific community had assigned to research Atlas's extraordinary abilities, and her appearance seemed inevitable. "Hello, Rebecca. This is Elelena Reeves." Her voice rang out through the phone, gentle but authoritative. "I've been following Atlas's story, and I'd really like to meet with you. Perhaps together we can explore abilities we've never seen in any animal before." Rebecca felt an unnamed anxiety as she heard these words. She didn't want Atlas to become a research subject. She didn't want her dog to pay the price for his newfound fame. But she also understood that if she wanted to protect Atlas, she would have to face people with significant influence in the scientific community. "Where can we meet?" Rebecca asked, her voice cautious. Dr. Reeves suggested meeting at a quiet cafe near Rebecca's clinic. Once the meeting was arranged, Rebecca couldn't shake the uneasy feeling rising within her. She didn't know what Dr. Reeves had in mind, but she clearly sensed that this wasn't going to be an easy conversation. The next day, Rebecca walked into the cafe with a thoughtful stride. When she reached the table where Dr. Reeves was waiting, the scientist smiled and greeted her, but her eyes were filled with professionalism and seriousness, nothing like the friendly invitations she'd received from other researchers. "Hello, Rebecca," Dr. Reeves spoke, her voice steady and clear. "I'm so glad you agreed to meet with me. I'm truly impressed by Atlas and the special abilities he possesses. Together we could explore and understand more about what's happening." Rebecca sat down, naturally keeping her distance, but the sense of unease still lingered. She looked into Dr. Reeves's eyes, trying to read her intentions. Dr. Reeves wasn't someone easily fooled, and it seemed she was prepared for this conversation. "Dr. Reeves, I want to make it clear that I don't want Atlas to become a test subject," Rebecca began, her voice firm but also filled with concern. "He's saved lives, and I can't let him be exploited. I want Atlas to live a peaceful life." Dr. Reeves nodded lightly, her sharp eyes never leaving Rebecca's. "I understand your concern," she said, "but what I want to do is study Atlas's special abilities scientifically to understand more about the potential that we've never explored in animals. I don't intend to exploit him. I just want to help you understand that what Atlas can do might change the way we perceive animals." Rebecca couldn't help but be skeptical of these words. She couldn't shake the thought that Even though scientific research seemed noble, it could still cause harm if not properly controlled. She didn't want Atlas to become an experiment. And no matter what Dr. Reeves said, Rebecca couldn't believe that she didn't have her own agenda. "I understand you have your reasons for being interested in Atlas," Rebecca continued, "but I will not let anyone take advantage of him. This dog is not a research tool. If you truly care about Atlas's safety, then I ask that you respect his rights." Dr. Reeves smiled, but this time there was a hint of patience in her eyes. "Rebecca, I know you're concerned, but no one will force you to let Atlas participate in any research you don't agree to. I simply want to work with you, to help you and Atlas understand more about these special abilities." Rebecca felt exhausted. This meeting wasn't as simple as she had thought, and although Dr. Reeves seemed eager to work with her, the unease in Rebecca's heart grew stronger. She could sense that Atlas was becoming more and more the object of attention, not just within the Riverside community, but in the scientific world as well. The bond between her and this little dog had surpassed all, but now she had to protect Atlas from larger forces. Rebecca quietly stood up, saying nothing more. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me, but I'll need to think it over." Dr. Reeves looked at her, said nothing more, and simply nodded. As Rebecca left the cafe, she couldn't stop thinking about the meeting and what was to come. She knew the battle to protect Atlas wasn't over. While recognition from the community might bring happiness, for Rebecca, it was also a reminder of the dangers she and Atlas would face in the future. The feeling of unease surged again as Rebecca remembered Dr. Reeves' words during the meeting. While Dr. Reeves seemed to want to help and understand Atlas, Rebecca still felt that something wasn't quite right. She couldn't allow anyone to exploit Atlas for the extraordinary abilities the puppy had. And she couldn't risk letting a research study go too far. Nevertheless, Rebecca decided she would give Dr. Reeves a chance, but only under certain conditions. So, when Dr. Reeves asked to conduct an experiment to learn more about Atlas's special abilities, Rebecca agreed, but with thorough preparation and strict supervision. A week later, Rebecca took Atlas to Dr. Reeves's laboratory. The room was bright and sterile, with modern research equipment all around, looking cold and unfamiliar to Atlas. The puppy looked around, ears perked up, and when his eyes met Rebecca's, a sense of uncertainty rose in her chest. She wasn't sure if this was the right decision. Dr. Reeves, though a serious scientist, still had a soft expression when she looked at Atlas. "Rebecca, I think we'll be able to do something amazing today, but I'll only proceed if you feel comfortable." Rebecca nodded, and Atlas stepped into the lab with her, his eyes bright, ears high, showing no fear. The puppy was always ready to explore new things. "All right, Atlas," Rebecca whispered. "Let's see what you can do today." Dr. Reeves began with a simple experiment. She asked Atlas to stand still inside a circle marked on the floor, and she stood next to him, preparing to observe his reactions. Then, she asked Rebecca and Atlas to close their eyes and try to sense the objects she would present in the room. Rebecca was a bit surprised when Dr. Reeves explained the experiment. "We'll test Atlas's ability to share sensory perception. Imagine that Atlas will feel everything you feel, and vice versa. You'll experience what Atlas is sensing. This is an experiment about connecting two senses, and if we succeed, we'll understand more about Atlas's abilities." Rebecca's heart fluttered. She didn't know if this experiment would truly help her understand Atlas more, but her curiosity filled her. She extended her hand and gently placed it on Atlas's head as a way to connect. "Now focus on your sensations, Atlas," Rebecca said. And at that moment, a strange feeling washed over her. She felt a profound connection, not just with Atlas, but with everything around them. A gentle wave of energy spread, like a synchrony between two beings. Rebecca could feel not just what she was experiencing, but also what Atlas was going through. The soft waves from the environment, each breeze that passed by, and even the feeling of the ground beneath Atlas' paws. She could feel each of his breaths, the tension and the readiness before every movement. Suddenly, a very vivid image appeared in Rebecca's mind. She felt as though she were in Atlas's eyes. She saw a world full of color and life, where everything was clearer, sharper than usual. She could feel Atlas' excitement as he ran towards the trees and patches of grass, but at the same time, she also felt a sense of caution, a quick response to every shift in the surroundings. Rebecca took a deep breath, opened her eyes, and looked at Dr. Reeves, unable to hide her astonishment. "This feeling, it's like I can understand everything Atlas is going through," she whispered, still in disbelief at what she had just experienced. Dr. Reeves smiled, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "We've made a significant breakthrough. Atlas not only senses his surroundings, but he also has the ability to share these feelings with you. This could explain some of the extraordinary abilities this dog possesses." Rebecca was still reeling from the experience, but at the same time, she felt a profound understanding of Atlas that she had never had before. For the first time, she truly understood that the bond between her and this dog was not just friendship or companionship. It was a deep connection, a supernatural ability that both she and Atlas were only just beginning to explore. "We can do amazing things with this ability," Dr. Reeves said, her voice full of hope. "This could be the beginning of research that surpasses any limits we've ever imagined." Rebecca looked at Atlas, the little dog standing still, his eyes shining with understanding and determination. She knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, Atlas would always be her strong and resilient companion, and she would never let this dog be exploited. The bond between Rebecca and Atlas had overcome all challenges, and now it had become a part of life, not only for Rebecca, but also for the entire Riverside community. The story of Atlas was no longer just a local tale. When the dog saved the drowning girl and the miraculous actions of Atlas spread through the media, the little dog became a living symbol of courage and unparalleled loyalty. It was no longer just a touching story. Atlas had become a symbol of resilience and the ability to overcome any challenge, no matter how difficult. The Riverside community, once peaceful and unnoticed, suddenly became a hot spot of attention. Animal lovers, researchers, and even celebrities from big cities began flocking to Riverside to meet Atlas and learn about the dog's special abilities. Stories of Atlas's miraculous rescue, about moments when the dog sensed dangers before they occurred, became a source of inspiration for many people. Rebecca noticed a clear change in how people viewed Atlas. They no longer saw the dog as just a regular pet. Atlas had become an indispensable part of the community. People gathered around her house, not only to meet Atlas, but also to share their own stories and to hear about the marvelous things the dog could do. The people in the community didn't just look at Atlas with respect, but with gratitude, as if Atlas had not only saved a life, but also restored faith in the miraculous. Rebecca began to feel the honor and admiration Atlas had brought, but she also had hidden concerns. She couldn't help but think about the shift in how people viewed the little dog. At times, she felt like she was losing control, as Atlas, once a part of her family, was now the object of unrelenting attention. Every time she and Atlas went out, someone would approach, ask to take a picture, or request to meet the dog, wanting to learn about the special abilities it possessed. This made Rebecca feel both proud and worried. She knew that this recognition could also bring risks. Yet, a part of her couldn't help but feel proud of Atlas. This little dog's story had inspired so many people. Those who had struggled in life, those who had felt hopeless, now looked at Atlas and saw a spark of hope. This little dog, though small, had saved not just one person, but an entire community, making everyone believe in miracles they thought would never happen. One day, while Rebecca and Atlas were walking in the park, she met an elderly man sitting on a bench. He saw Atlas and immediately stood up, walking over with admiration in his eyes. "This is the dog I've heard so much about," he said, his voice a little choked. "Its story has made me believe that sometimes miracles really can happen even when we least expect it." Rebecca smiled, her gaze softening as she watched Atlas approach the elderly man, his tail wagging gently. The puppy had done something that not only the elderly man but many others could feel too. The belief that miracles and courage can appear anywhere, even in the smallest of creatures. "Atlas doesn't just save lives," Rebecca said, her voice filled with pride. "He has changed the way we perceive the limits of animals, and, to me, Atlas is not just a dog. He's a friend. He's a part of my family." This recognition wasn't just a simple compliment. It was an affirmation that Atlas wasn't just special for his ability to sense danger or save lives, but for the magical connection he brings between humans and animals. Every step Atlas takes in the Riverside community is now more than just the journey of a puppy. It is a journey of hope, courage, and a powerful message of loyalty and unconditional love. The story of Atlas has transcended all borders, becoming a symbol mentioned not only by those in the Riverside community, but also far beyond. Every time people look at the dog, they don't just see a cute creature. They see an extraordinary strength, an animal capable of doing things that only humans might imagine. No one can deny the miracle in Atlas's actions, and gradually his story has become part of history, not just of a small community, but of an entire nation. One day, as the entire Riverside community gathered in the central square to hold a small celebration, a special announcement was made. Representatives from the government, along with rescue agencies, had arrived to present a special medal to Atlas. This was the first time a dog had been officially honored in such a way. The townspeople gathered eagerly, waiting in excitement, for they knew that today Atlas would receive the recognition he truly deserved. Rebecca stood beside Atlas, her eyes fixed on the puppy she had raised since his early days, unable to believe her eyes as she witnessed what was about to unfold. Atlas stood tall, his eyes still bright, as if he understood that today was a special day. Just as she had thought, Atlas was not only a loyal friend, but also a powerful symbol of courage, resilience, and unconditional love. The story of Atlas is not just a miraculous journey of a gifted puppy. It is a profound reminder of love, sacrifice, and the enduring belief in goodness. In a world full of agendas and hidden threats, courage, friendship, and the deep bond between humans and animals can overcome all boundaries. Rebecca didn't just protect Atlas from those who sought to exploit him. She defended his right to live freely, to be loved, and to be respected as a living being full of wonder. Atlas is a symbol of everyday miracles, a reminder that amidst the noise of life, if we choose to listen, to care, and to cherish the simple things around us, kindness and love can lead to extraordinary outcomes.